When Evelyn Hart's mail-orderer husband stepped off that train in Pine Hollow, Wyoming, she realized three things instantly. First, Jonas Pike was the most magnificent man she'd ever laid eyes on. Second, at 6'6", he was too tall to fit through a single doorway in her house. And third, as the entire town gathered to gawk and whisper, she'd just made either the best or worst decision of her life. But stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from, because what happened next would change Pine Hollow forever. The morning of Jonas Pike's arrival, Evelyn Hart stood before her bedroom mirror for the third time in an hour, smoothing down the dove-grey dress she'd pressed twice already. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the cameo brooch at her throat, the one her late husband Thomas had given her on their wedding day. 7 years passed. The September sunlight streaming through the lace curtains cast delicate shadows across her face, highlighting the worry lines that had appeared in the 2 years since Thomas's death. "You're being foolish, Evelyn," she whispered to her reflection, "absolutely foolish." But foolish or not, Jonas Pike would arrive on the noon train, and she would meet him as promised. Their correspondence had begun 6 months ago when her sister Charlotte had placed an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times without her knowledge. Evelyn had been furious at first, mortified that her loneliness had been broadcast to strangers across the territories. But then Jonas's first letter arrived, written in a careful, steady hand that spoke of quiet strength and gentle wisdom. He described himself as a simple man, good with his hands, better with animals than people. He'd worked lumber camps in Minnesota, built barns across the Dakota Territory, and saved every penny to buy land of his own. He wanted a partner, he wrote, not a servant. Someone who could talk about books and stars, who didn't mind a man who spoke slowly but listened well. He'd been honest about his appearance too. "I'm told I'm uncommonly tall. Some folks find it unsettling. I hope you won't be one of them." Uncommonly tall. Evelyn had smiled at the modest phrasing. She was 5'2" herself, petite and fine-bed. How tall could uncommonly tall really be? Now, as she pinned her dark hair up for the 4th time, her stomach twisted with nervousness. In 3 hours, she would meet the man whose letters had made her laugh for the first time since Thomas's passing. The man whose words about the Northern Lights had brought tears to her eyes. The man who'd written in his last letter, "I can't promise to be what you dream of, Miss Evelyn, but I can promise to try every day to be what you need." A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Evelyn, are you decent?" Charlotte's voice carried through the wood, bright with barely contained excitement. "Come in." Her sister swept into the room, a whirlwind of energy in a butter-yellow dress. Charlotte was everything Evelyn wasn't. Tall, bold, effortlessly beautiful, and endlessly optimistic. She'd married the previous spring to Robert Sullivan, the owner of Pine Hollow's general store, and had appointed herself the architect of Evelyn's romantic future. "The whole town is buzzing," Charlotte announced, settling onto the edge of the bed. "Mabel Pritchard has been stationed at the mercantile window since dawn, and she swears she'll get the first look at your mysterious suitor. Sarah Jenkins is taking bets on whether he'll actually show up. Can you imagine taking bets?" "Charlotte, please." Evelyn pressed her fingers to her temples. "You're making this worse." "Worse, darling. This is the most exciting thing to happen in Pine Hollow since the Fletcher twins both proposed to the same girl. Everyone's delighted for you. Everyone's delighted to have something to gossip about." Charlotte's expression softened. She rose and moved behind Evelyn, meeting her sister's eyes in the mirror. "They care about you, Evie. We all do. We've watched you hide away in this little house for 2 years, working yourself to the bone, trying to keep Thomas's farm running alone. We just want to see you happy again." Evelyn's throat tightened. "What if he takes one look at me and gets right back on that train? Then he's a fool and will throw rotten tomatoes at the caboose." Charlotte squeezed her shoulders. "But he won't. You've been writing to each other for months. He knows your mind, your heart. That matters more than anything else." "Does it?" Evelyn turned to face her sister. "I've seen his words, Charlotte, but words can hide a multitude of sins. What if he drinks? What if he has a temper? Thomas was gentle, kind. Thomas is gone." Charlotte said it softly but firmly. "And you can't spend the rest of your life comparing every man to a ghost. Jonas Pike may not be Thomas, but maybe that's exactly what you need." Before Evelyn could respond, the distant whistle of the noon train echoed across the valley. Both women froze. "That's it," Charlotte breathed. "Come on, we need to go." The walk to the station felt both eternal and instantaneous. Pine Hollow's main street stretched before them, a ribbon of packed dirt lined with false front buildings that tried valiantly to look civilized against the backdrop of endless Wyoming sky. The town had grown in recent years, a result of the railroad pushing through, but it still maintained the rough edges of frontier life. Cowboys lounged outside the saloon. A freight wagon creaked past, loaded with supplies for the ranches scattered across the territory. Somewhere a dog barked incessantly, and everywhere people stared. "Morning, Mrs. Hart," called out Jim Bradley, the blacksmith, his grin knowing. "Big day, eh?" "Good luck, dear," added Mrs. Winters from the bakery steps. Even old Silas Creek, who rarely spoke to anyone, tipped his hat and nodded solemnly as they passed. "See," Charlotte whispered, "everyone's on your side." "Everyone's treating this like a circus," Evelyn muttered back. By the time they reached the station, a considerable crowd had gathered. Evelyn's cheeks burned as she recognized nearly every face. Mabel Pritchard perched on a bench like a hawk, scanning for prey. Reverend Morrison and his wife Martha, attempting to look dignified rather than curious, half a dozen ranch hands who'd apparently found reason to be in town at precisely noon. And Robert, Charlotte's husband, leaning against a post with an encouraging smile. "You made it," he said warmly, moving to kiss his wife's cheek, was beginning to worry Charlotte would talk your ear off all the way here. "I was providing moral support," Charlotte protested. "You were gossiping about everyone in town, which is also moral support. Evelyn needs to know what she's walking into." The train whistle sounded again, much closer now, and all conversation died. Evelyn felt her heart hammering against her ribs as the locomotive rounded the bend, its great black engine belching steam and cinders. The shriek of brakes filled the air as it slowed, and then with a final hiss and shudder, the noon train from Cheyenne came to rest at the Pine Hollow platform. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Passengers began to disembark. A mining engineer, Evelyn recognized, two women in traveling suits, a family with 3 children, an elderly man with a cane, but no one who could possibly be Jonas Pike. Evelyn felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment beginning to build in her chest. Perhaps he hadn't come after all. Perhaps he'd changed his mind. Perhaps then she saw him. Or rather, she saw the top of his head first, which cleared the train car's exit by at least 6 in. He had to duck, actually duck, to get through the doorway, and even then his shoulders barely fit through the frame. And when Jonas Pike finally stepped fully onto the platform, straightening to his full height, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. He was absolutely enormous. 6'6" didn't do it justice. He seemed carved from the mountains themselves, broad-shouldered and solid, with hands that could probably span Evelyn's waist. He wore simple but clean clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with muscle, a vest that looked ready to surrender its buttons at any moment. His hair was the color of wheat in late summer, slightly too long and falling across his forehead, and his face, Evelyn's breath caught. He had the kindest face she'd ever seen. It wasn't a handsome face, not in the classical sense. His features were too strong, too weathered by years of outdoor work. His nose had clearly been broken at least once. A thin scar traced his left cheekbone, but his eyes, pale blue and infinitely gentle, held an expression of such open vulnerability that Evelyn felt something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. Jonas Pike was terrified. She could see it at the way his massive hands clutched his worn carpetbag, knuckles white with tension, in the way his eyes scanned the crowd with barely concealed alarm, in the way he seemed to be trying to make himself smaller, an impossible task for a man of his proportions. He was searching for her, Evelyn realized, looking for the woman whose letters he'd treasured, whose words had convinced him to travel 800 minutes to a town where he knew no one. And the crowd staring at him like he was some kind of curiosity from a traveling show was making everything worse. Before she could second-guess it herself, Evelyn stepped forward. "Mr. Pike." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but his head snapped toward her instantly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Miss Evelyn." His voice was deeper than she'd imagined, but soft, almost tentative. Yes. She moved closer, acutely aware of every eye on them. I'm Evelyn Hart. Welcome to Pine Hollow. He stared at her for a long moment, and she watched a dozen emotions flicker across his face. Relief, wonder, disbelief, and something that might have been awe. Then slowly a smile spread across his features, transforming them completely. When Jonas Pike smiled, truly smiled, it was like watching sunrise break over the mountains. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you're much prettier than your letters led me to believe." A laugh bubbled out of her, born of nervousness and surprise and something that felt dangerously like joy. "You're much taller than your letters led me to believe." "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck, his smile turning sheepish. "I might have understated that some. I didn't want to scare you off." Well, Evelyn found herself smiling up at him, having to tilt her head back quite far to maintain eye contact. "I'm sufficiently scared now, I assure you." He winced. "I'm sorry. I am teasing Mr. Pike." She surprised herself with her own boldness. "You'll find I do that from time to time." His expression softened with something that looked like gratitude. "Jonas, please. Mr. Pike is my father, and he's considerably meaner than I am." "Jonas," then she extended her hand formally. "Shall we get you away from your admirers?" He glanced at the crowd for the first time since spotting her, and his face reened. "Are they always this interested in newcomers?" "Only the ones who block out the sun when they stand on the platform." Charlotte materialized at Evelyn's elbow, grinning like a cat with cream. "My goodness, Mr. Pike, when you wrote that you were tall, I don't think any of us quite pictured this." "Charlotte," Evelyn hissed. "Manners." "What?" "I'm being complimentary." Charlotte extended her hand, which disappeared entirely in Jonas's massive palm. "I'm Charlotte Sullivan, Evelyn's sister, and that handsome devil trying not to laugh is my husband, Robert. Pleasure to meet you both." Jonas shook Robert's hand with careful restraint, clearly conscious of his own strength. "I appreciate the welcome." "Oh, this isn't the welcome," Charlotte said cheerfully. "This is the gawking. The welcome happens at the house where we've prepared enough food to feed a lumber camp, which, given your size, seems appropriate." "Charlotte." Evelyn wanted the earth to swallow her whole, but Jonas just laughed, a warm, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Sullivan. I've been eating train food for 3 days, and I'm beginning to forget what real cooking tastes like." As they began walking toward the wagon Robert had brought, the crowd slowly dispersed, though not without considerable whispering and backward glances. Evelyn was acutely conscious of Jonas beside her, his shadow stretching across the street like a sundial. He matched his pace to hers carefully, his long legs taking steps half their natural length to keep from outpacing her. "I have a farm about 2 mi out of town," Evelyn said, trying to fill the awkward silence. "It's not much. 40 acres, a house, a barn, some chickens and pigs. My late husband built most of it himself." "It sounds fine," Jonas said quietly. "The house is small, though." She bit her lip, glancing up at him. "I'm not sure if I'll fit." He gave her that gentle smile again. "I'll manage, Miss Evelyn." "I usually do. I spent 6 months in a lumber camp where the ceiling was 6 ft. Learned to duck real quick." They reached the wagon, and Jonas loaded his carpet bag, which looked comically small in his hands, into the back. Then he turned to help Evelyn up onto the seat, and she was struck again by his carefulness. His hands were calloused and work roughened, but his touch on her elbow was infinitely gentle, as though she were made of spun glass. The ride to the farm passed in a strange mixture of conversation and silence. Charlotte chattered enough for all of them, interrogating Jonas about his journey, his work experience, his thoughts on Wyoming. Robert occasionally interjected with more practical questions about Jonas's carpentry skills and farming knowledge, and Jonas answered everything with patient honesty, his deep voice steady and calm. But Evelyn found herself mostly silent, stealing glances at the man beside her. In daylight, away from the station crowd, she could study him more carefully. He sat with his shoulders slightly hunched as though trying to take up less space, a habit born from years of being too large for the world around him. His hands rested on his knees, scarred and powerful, and his eyes, when they occasionally met hers, held a question he was too polite to voice. "Are you having second thoughts?" She wasn't sure how to answer that question, even to herself. When the Hart farm came into view, Evelyn saw it with fresh eyes, imagining how it must look to Jonas. The house was a simple structure, 2 stories of whitewashed wood that Thomas had built in stages over their 5 years of marriage. The barn leaned slightly to one side, a problem she'd been meaning to fix for months. The chicken coop needed re-roofing. The fence around the vegetable garden sagged in places. It was a property that had been slowly falling apart without a man to maintain it, and the evidence of her struggle was everywhere. "It's lovely," Jonas said softly. Evelyn glanced at him in surprise. "It's falling down." "It's loved." He pointed to the flower boxes beneath the windows, bright with late-season blooms. "Someone tends those with care." "And that garden," he nodded toward her vegetable patch. "That's been worked by someone who knows what they're doing." "Structure can be fixed, Miss Evelyn. But a place that's loved, that's what makes a house a home." She felt an unexpected sting of tears and blinked them back quickly. "Thank you." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and as Jonas climbed down, the entire vehicle rising noticeably with the redistribution of weight, Evelyn found herself holding her breath. This was the moment he would try to enter her home. And Jonas approached the front porch, climbed the 3 steps, and then stopped dead as he reached the door. He studied the frame carefully, tilting his head like a carpenter assessing a problem. Then, without a word, he bent nearly double to fit through the opening, his shoulders scraping both sides of the jamb. He didn't make it. On his first attempt, his back hit the top of the frame with a solid thunk. He straightened with a WS, rubbing his spine. "Maybe if I turn sideways," he muttered. The second attempt was only marginally more successful. He got his head and one shoulder through before getting wedged completely, stuck half in and half out of Evelyn's house like a cork in a bottle. "Oh dear God," Charlotte breathed, pressing her hand to her mouth. Though whether to hide horror or laughter, Evelyn couldn't tell. "Don't panic," Jonas called out, his voice slightly muffled. "This happens sometimes. I just need to—" He tried to back out, his vest caught on something. There was a tearing sound. "Mr. Pike, please, just almost got it. Jonas, stop moving before you." With a final desperate wriggle, Jonas extracted himself from the doorframe, leaving behind a button, a small strip of fabric from his vest, and a visible dent in the wooden frame itself. He stood on the porch, breathing hard, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "I am so sorry," he said. "I'll fix that and pay for any damage, and probably never speak of this again if that's all right with you." For a moment the silence was absolute. Then Charlotte started laughing, great gasping peals of laughter that she tried desperately to contain. Robert followed, his shoulders shaking, and then to Evelyn's own surprise, she was laughing too, the tension of the entire morning breaking like a dam. Jonas watched them, bewildered, until gradually a smile tugged at his lips. Then he was laughing too, deep and genuine, the sound rolling across the farm like thunder. "Good heavens," Evelyn managed, wiping her eyes. "You could block out the sun." Jonas grinned down at her. "Only if you stand close enough, ma'am." "Perhaps," Charlotte suggested, still giggling, "we should measure the door frames before we plan the wedding." The laughter died abruptly. Evelyn felt her cheeks flame, and Jonas looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him. "Charlotte." Robert grabbed his wife's arm. "Come on, let's give them some privacy. We'll unload Mr. Pike's bag and then head back to town." "But I wanted to now, Charlotte." As her sister was diplomatically dragged away, still protesting, Evelyn turned to Jonas. He stood before her, this giant of a man who couldn't fit through her door, looking more vulnerable than any person had a right to be. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have been clear in my letters. This?" He gestured at himself. "This is always a problem. I understand if you want to reconsider." "Reconsider?" Evelyn stepped closer, having to crane her neck back to maintain eye contact. "Mr. Pike Jonas, I've just watched you get stuck in my doorframe like Winnie the Pooh in a honeypot. I've laughed harder in the last 5 minutes than I have in 2 years. And if you think I'm going to send you packing before I've had a chance to hear your thoughts on the door frame situation, you're sadly mistaken." His eyes widened. "You've read Winnie the Pooh multiple times. My niece adores it. I love that book." His face lit up with childlike enthusiasm. "I've read it twice on my own. It's nice. Everything's so gentle." And there it was again. That crack in her armor widening because this enormous man who could probably bend iron bars and uproot trees, Loved a story about a gentle bear and his friends. Would you like to come inside? Evelyn asked. We'll have to work out the logistics, but I promise the ceilings are slightly more forgiving than the door frame. I'd like that. Jonas retrieved his carpet bag from where Robert had set it. And Miss Evelyn, thank you for not forgiving me a chance. We're both taking chances here, she said softly. Let's see if we can make them count. Getting Jonas fully into the house required creativity. They eventually determined that if he turned sideways, ducked his head to his chest, and shuffled through at an angle, he could just barely make it without causing structural damage. It was neither elegant nor dignified, but it worked. Once inside, Jonas straightened carefully, his head clearing the ceiling with perhaps 2 in to spare. He stood in Evelyn's modest parlor, taking in the space with those careful blue eyes, the worn but comfortable furniture, the bookshelf packed with volumes, the sampler on the wall that read, "Home is where the heart is," in her own careful cross-stitch, the photographs on the mantel. His gaze lingered on the largest photograph, Evelyn and Thomas on their wedding day, young and full of hope. "Your husband?" Jonas asked quietly. "Yes, Thomas." Evelyn moved to stand beside him, looking at the photograph she'd memorized every detail of. "He died 2 years ago. Pneumonia. It was very quick." "I'm sorry." Jonas's voice was gentle. "That must have been hard." "It was. It is." She took a breath. "But life goes on. The farm doesn't tend itself, and loneliness is its own kind of death, I've learned." They stood in silence for a moment, and Evelyn was surprised by how comfortable it felt. She'd expected awkwardness, uncertainty, and there was certainly some of that, but there was also something else, something that felt almost like recognition, as though her soul had been waiting for his presence without knowing it. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked finally, "and we should probably discuss arrangements. You've come a long way, and we have decisions to make." "I'd appreciate that." Jonas set his bag down carefully. "And Miss Evelyn, I want you to know I don't expect anything. I came here hoping we might suit, but if we don't, I'll find work in town and respect your wishes. You don't owe me anything just because I bought a train ticket." It was exactly what he should say, and Evelyn appreciated it. But more than that, she believed he meant it. There was no presumption in his manner, no entitled expectation, just honest hope. "Let's take it one day at a time," she said. "For now, you can stay in the spare room upstairs. We'll get to know each other properly, and if it works out," she trailed off, unsure how to finish. "If it works out," Jonas said softly, "I'll be the luckiest man in Wyoming territory." In the kitchen, as Evelyn prepared coffee and sliced the honey cake Charlotte had brought, she watched Jonas from the corner of her eye. He sat at her table, looking comically large on the simple wooden chair, and studied the room with genuine interest. His fingers traced the grain of the table. He noticed the herbs drying in bundles by the window and asked about each one. He complimented the tidiness of her kitchen and the brightness of the curtains she'd sewn herself. "You have a gift for making a place feel welcoming." He said, "My mother was like that. She could make a tent feel like a palace was." Evelyn set coffee before him. "She passed when I was 16. Fever." His large hands wrapped around the cup, making it look like a child's toy. "My paw raised me and my brothers after that, but it wasn't the same. He tried, but he didn't have her warmth, you know. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He sipped the coffee, then closed his eyes with evident pleasure. "Oh, that's good. Real good. Thank you." They talked as afternoon faded toward evening. Jonas told her about his childhood in Minnesota, about his father's lumber operation, about the brothers scattered across the territories. He spoke of the work he'd done, back-breaking, honest labor that had shaped him into the man he was. He was careful with his words, thoughtful, never speaking more than necessary, but also never leaving her questions unanswered. In turn, Evelyn told him about her life, about growing up in Boston, about coming west with Thomas to seek their fortune, about building a life from nothing in this hard, beautiful land. She spoke of Thomas with affection, but without the desperate clinging to the past that had characterized her conversations for so long. And Jonas listened with an attention that made her feel truly heard. "What made you answer Charlotte's advertisement?" Jonas asked finally. "If you don't mind my asking," Evelyn considered the question carefully. "Truthfully, I didn't." At first, I was furious with her for placing it. But then your letter came, and she paused, searching for the right words. You wrote about the northern lights, about seeing them in Minnesota, and how they made you feel small but connected to something larger. And I thought, this is a man who sees the world the way I do. So I wrote back. Jonas's ears turned pink. I worried that was too much, too poetic. Maybe for a simple carpenter. It was perfect. Evelyn met his eyes. Your letters were what convinced me you were worth meeting, that we might actually suit. And now, after meeting me, his voice was carefully neutral, but she heard the vulnerability beneath it. Now, Evelyn considered lying, offering easy platitudes. But Jonas deserved honesty. Now, I think you're probably the kindest man I've ever met, and watching you try to fit through my doorframe was the most entertaining thing that's happened to me in years, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. We're strangers, Jonas, and marriage is a risk, he finished. I know, but Miss Evelyn, every good thing I've ever had in my life came from taking a risk. Leaving Minnesota, learning new trades, saving money when it would have been easier to spend it. Coming here to meet you. He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. I'm not a gambling man, but I'd wager everything I have on the chance that we could be happy together. It was the most eloquent thing he'd said all day, and it stole Evelyn's breath. Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Jonas stood immediately, his head nearly touching the ceiling, and moved to answer it. He navigated the doorframe with marginally more success this time, only slightly scraping his shoulders. Reverend Morrison stood on the porch, hat in hand, his wife Martha beside him. "Good evening, Mr. Pike," the Reverend said warmly. "Forgive the intrusion, but Martha and I wanted to welcome you properly. We were at the station earlier, but thought it best to give you time to settle before descending upon you." "That's kind of you, sir." Jonas stepped aside to let them enter, then froze. "Actually, maybe we should talk outside. The house is a bit tight." "Nonsense." Martha Morrison brushed past him, then stopped dead as she fully registered his size. "Oh my, you really are quite tall, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for don't you dare apologize." Martha was a tiny woman, barely 5 herself, and she craned her neck to look up at him. "My Henry is 6 feet exactly, and I've spent 30 years telling him he's the perfect height. You're simply more perfect than he is." "Martha," the Reverend laughed, but Jonas was grinning, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "That's a generous way to look at it, ma'am." They gathered in the parlor, and Evelyn served more coffee and cake, while the Morrisons chatted easily with Jonas. Watching them, she realized they were conducting a gentle interrogation, assessing Jonas's character, his intentions, his suitability. The Reverend had been a friend of Thomas's and still looked after Evelyn like a daughter. His approval would matter to the community. "So you're a carpenter, Mr. Pike?" Reverend Morrison asked. "Among other things, sir, I can do most building work, framing, roofing, finished carpentry. I've worked blacksmithing some too, and farming, though I'm better with animals than crops, if I'm honest. The church roof has been troubling me," the Reverend mused. "There's a leak near the bell tower that none of our local men have managed to fix. Too high up, they say. I could take a look if you'd like." Jonas's offer was immediate. "Heights don't bother me much. I might take you up on that." The Reverend's eyes twinkled. "Though I have to ask, how exactly do you plan to live in this house? No offense to Evelyn's late husband, but Thomas was a man of more conventional proportions. This place wasn't built for someone of your stature." Jonas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture Evelyn was beginning to recognize as his nervous habit. "I'll manage, sir. I've slept in worse places. And if Miss Evelyn and I decide to make this permanent, well, I can modify the house, raise some door frames, maybe add some height to the ceilings. I'm handy with carpentry. That's quite an undertaking. Worth it, though, if things work out." Jonas glanced at Evelyn, and she saw in his eyes both hope and uncertainty. The Morrisons stayed for an hour, and by the time they left, Evelyn could see that Jonas had passed whatever test they'd administered. The Reverend shook his hand warmly, and Martha hugged him, or rather hugged as much of him as she could reach, which was approximately his waist. "You're a good man, Jonas Pike," Martha said firmly. "Anyone can see that, and Evelyn deserves a good man." After they left, Evelyn and Jonas stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The September air was cooling rapidly, promising cold nights ahead. "That went well, I think," Jonas said quietly. "They liked you." Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The whole town will know by morning that Reverend Morrison approves. Does that matter in a place like Pine Hollow?" "Yes. For better or worse, community opinion matters." She looked up at him. "But my opinion matters more. And I'd like you to stay, Jonas. For a while at least. Let's see how we fit." His smile could have lit the entire valley. "I'd like that too, Miss Evelyn, very much." That night, as Evelyn lay in her bed and listened to Jonas moving carefully through the house upstairs, every creak and groan of the floorboards announcing his presence, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what she'd set in motion. Clear's throat, this giant of a man who couldn't fit through her door frames but fit somehow into the spaces in her heart she'd thought were closed forever. It terrified her. It thrilled her, and as she finally drifted to sleep, she found herself smiling in the darkness, already anticipating tomorrow. In the spare room above, Jonas lay on a bed that was at least a foot too short for him, his feet hanging off the end, staring at the same ceiling from a different angle. He thought about Evelyn's smile, about the way she'd laughed when he got stuck in her doorway, about the intelligence and warmth in her eyes. He thought about her letters and how the reality of her somehow exceeded even the promise of those carefully written pages. "Please," he whispered to the darkness, to God, to whatever force governed the universe. "Please let me be what she needs." And somewhere between them, in the walls and floorboards and foundation of that small house, something shifted and settled, as though the building itself were learning to accommodate this new presence, learning to make room for a man who was too tall for the doorframe, but who just might be exactly right for the woman who lived there. The moon rose full and bright over Pine Hollow, casting silver shadows across the farm, and inside two lonely people slept under the same roof for the first time, each dreaming cautiously of the possibility of home. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Hart farm, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and rose. Evelyn woke to unfamiliar sounds, heavy footsteps moving carefully overhead, the creak of floorboards bearing weight they hadn't known in years, the deep clearing of a throat that resonated through the walls. For one disoriented moment, she forgot why these sounds existed. And then memory rushed back like a tide. Jonas Pike, her mail-order husband, who couldn't fit through the door. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, pinning her hair with practice efficiency and smoothing down her work dress. Through the window, she could see the first light touching the barn, illuminating the sagging roof she'd been ignoring for months. The chickens would need feeding. The pigs were probably already complaining. The day's work stretched before her like every other day, except now there was a man upstairs who'd traveled 800 months because her letters had promised him the possibility of home. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical thing. She was halfway down the stairs when she smelled coffee brewing. Evelyn stopped, one hand on the railing, confusion giving way to surprise. In the kitchen, she found Jonas standing before her stove, his massive frame bent nearly in half to peer into the coffee pot. He dressed in work clothes, worn denim, and a flannel shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders, and his wheat-colored hair was still damp, presumably from washing at the pump outside. "You're up early," Evelyn said from the doorway. Jonas straightened so quickly he nearly hit his head on a hanging pot. "Miss Evelyn, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume. I just thought I'm used to early starts, and I figured you'd have chores, so maybe coffee would." He stopped, taking a breath. "I'm making a mess of this, aren't I?" "You're making coffee," Evelyn said, moving into the room. "Which is considerably better than a mess, though. I'm curious how you managed to find everything in the dark. I've got decent night vision. Comes from years of getting up before the sun." He poured her a cup with careful precision, and she noticed his hands were already chapped from the cold morning air. "I went out to look at your barn. Hope that's all right. The door was open, so I figured the latch is broken. Has been for months." Evelyn accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "I keep meaning to fix it, but there's always something more urgent." Jonas nodded slowly, and she could see him cataloguing that information, adding it to some mental list. The roof's got some bad spots too, and the fence around the chicken yard is mostly held together by hope and determination. Are you always this observant? Or are you trying to impress me? A smile tugged at his mouth. Can't it be both? Despite herself, Evelyn laughed. In the early morning light filtering through her kitchen window, Jonas Pike looked less like the terrifying giant from yesterday, and more like a man simply trying his best. His eyes held the same gentleness, but also a weariness, as though he expected her to change her mind at any moment. I usually do chores around sunrise, Evelyn said. Feed the animals, collect eggs, check on the pigs. It takes about an hour. After that, there's breakfast, and then the real work begins. Whatever needs doing most urgently that day. I'd like to help with the chores, and the work. Jonas set his own coffee down. I'm here to be useful, Miss Evelyn. Please let me be useful. The plea in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't a man looking to take over, to assert dominance over her farm and her life. This was a man desperate to prove his worth, to justify his presence. It made her chest ache in a way she didn't quite understand. All right, she said softly. Let's start with the chickens. They worked together in the cool morning air, moving through tasks with a rhythm that was awkward at first, but gradually found its own flow. Jonas was devastatingly efficient. His long arms made quick work of distributing feed, and the chickens, after an initial period of alarm at his size, seemed to accept his presence with equanimity. He handled them with surprising gentleness, carefully retrieving eggs from beneath suspicious hens, who would have pecked Evelyn bloody for the same presumption. You're good with them, she observed, watching him coax a particularly recalcitrant hen off her nest. Animals make sense to me, Jonas said, cradling 3 eggs in one enormous palm. They don't care how tall you are or whether you say the right things. They just want to be treated with respect and fed on time. He glanced at her. People are more complicated than they are. At the pigsty, Jonas spent several minutes studying the wooden fence that was indeed held together mostly through faith. He tested each post, examining joins and supports with a critical eye, while the pig snuffled at his boots with interest. This needs to be rebuilt completely, he said finally. The wood's rotted through in at least 6 places. It's a wonder they haven't pushed through already. I know. Evelyn poured slop into the trough, and the pigs descended on it with enthusiasm. I was hoping it would last through winter. Maybe I could reinforce it in spring, or I could rebuild it next week. Jonas straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. If you've got lumber, or we could go into town and purchase some. Won't take more than a few days to put up something solid. Jonas, you just arrived. You don't need to, Miss Evelyn. He turned to face her fully, and in the morning light she could see the determination in his expression. I came here to be a partner, to help build a life together, not to be a burden. Please let me do this. It's what I'm good at. She studied him for a long moment, this man who was so desperate to prove himself worthy. All right, we'll go into town tomorrow for supplies, but Jonas, you're not a burden. You need to know that. His smile was almost heartbreaking in its gratitude. Thank you. By the time they finished morning chores, the sun had fully risen, painting the valley in brilliant autumn light. Evelyn cooked breakfast, eggs from their chickens, bacon from the smokehouse, biscuits that Jonas ate 4 of before apparently remembering his manners and stopping. She watched him eat with barely concealed amusement, noting how he tried to make himself smaller at her table, hunching his shoulders and keeping his elbows close. You'll give yourself a bacachi sitting like that, she said finally. Jonas looked up, startled. Like what? Like you're trying to fold yourself into a box. Sit naturally, please. You're allowed to take up space. He hesitated, then slowly straightened, his shoulders relaxing. The immediate effect was dramatic. He looked both more comfortable and significantly larger. His knees bumped the underside of the table. Sorry, he muttered. Don't apologize. We'll figure it out. Evelyn refilled his coffee. Jonas, can I ask you something? Yes, ma'am. Has it always been difficult being so tall? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same careful thoughtfulness he brought to everything. When I was young, no, I was just the biggest kid, which meant I was good at farm work and people left me alone mostly. But around 15, 16, I shot up another 6 in a year. Suddenly, I was knocking things over, breaking chairs, hitting my head on everything. My brothers teased me pretty mercilessly, called me Goliath in the lumber. P said I was built for hard work and should stop complaining. That sounds lonely. It was sometimes. Jonas traced the rim of his cup with one finger. People treat you different when you're this size. Men want to fight you to prove something. Women. He trailed off, his ears ringing. Women. What? They're either scared or they think you're some kind of curiosity. I've been called a freak more than once. He said it matter-of-factly. But Evelyn heard the old hurt beneath the words. When your advertisement came, when you wrote back to my letter, I thought maybe it could be different. Maybe someone could see past the size to the person. But I understand if it's too much, if I'm too much. Evelyn set down her own cup with deliberate care. Jonas Pike, look at me. She waited until his blue eyes met hers. You're not too much. You're different. Yes, unusually tall, certainly, but I spent 2 years with a good man who saw me as a person, not a possession, who treated me with kindness and respect. And in one day you've shown me more of those same qualities than most men show in a lifetime. So please stop apologizing for existing. He stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his expression. You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. It's a character flaw according to my sister. A slow smile spread across Jonas's face, transforming it entirely. I'm beginning to think Charlotte placing that advertisement might be the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. Don't let her hear you say that. She'll never let either of us forget it. They cleaned up breakfast together, establishing a routine that felt oddly natural. Jonas washed while Evelyn dried, and they moved around each other in the small kitchen with surprising ease. He was careful not to crowd her, conscious of his size, but Evelyn found herself oddly comfortable with his presence. There was something steady about him, something solid and reliable that made her feel safe in a way she hadn't felt since Thomas died. Around mid-morning, a wagon rolled up the drive. Through the window, Evelyn spotted Charlotte perched on the seat beside Robert, looking bright-eyed and eager. Brace yourself, Evelyn warned Jonas. My sister has arrived, and she's brought reinforcements. Charlotte swept into the house after Jonas had once again performed his awkward shuffle through the doorframe, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. Good morning, I've brought pie and questions in that order of importance. Charlotte, it's barely 10 taug, which is why I brought pie. Everything's better with pie. She set the basket on the table and turned to Jonas with a critical eye. Mr. Pike, you're even larger in daylight. How did you sleep? Charlotte. Evelyn felt her face flame. What? It's a reasonable question. That bed upstairs is barely 6 feet long. You must have been terribly uncomfortable. Jonas, to his credit, handled the interrogation with good humor. I've slept in worse places, Mrs. Sullivan. Your sister's home is very comfortable. You're a terrible liar, but I appreciate the effort. Charlotte began unpacking the basket, revealing not just 1, but 3 pies. I've brought apple, cherry, and buttermilk. Robert thinks I'm being intrusive, but I think I'm being helpful. There's a difference. Robert, who'd followed his wife inside, shook his head with fond exasperation. What my wife means is that she's constitutionally incapable of minding her own business. It's not minding my business when my sister's happiness is at stake, Charlotte retorted. Evelyn, dear, you look tired. Are you sleeping well? I'm sleeping fine. Are you sure? Because you have that look you get when you're worrying about something. The pinch between your eyebrows right there. Charlotte, I swear. Actually, Jonas interrupted gently, if you folks have a few minutes, I was hoping to discuss some repairs to the property. Mr. Sullivan, you run the general store. Is that right? Robert nodded clearly, grateful for the change of subject. That's right. Dry goods, hardware, some lumber. I'd like to purchase supplies to rebuild the pigsty and repair the barn roof. Maybe look at some tools if Miss Evelyn doesn't already have what's needed. Jonas pulled a worn leather wallet from his pocket. I can pay cash. Now hold on, Evelyn protested. Jonas, you don't need to. I want to. His voice was firm but gentle. Miss Evelyn, you've given me a place to stay and a chance to prove myself. Let me do this, please. Charlotte and Robert exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Well, but, Robert said carefully, we can certainly outfit you with what you need. Why don't you come by the store this afternoon? We'll work out the details. I'll do that, thank you. After her sister and brother-in-law departed, Charlotte still firing questions, even as she was being firmly escorted to the wagon, Evelyn and Jonas stood in the suddenly quiet kitchen. You really don't have to spend your money on my farm, Evelyn said softly. Jonas turned to face her, and his expression was serious. Miss Evelyn, I've been saving for 8 years, living cheap, working every job I could find, putting aside every penny. You know what I was saving for? A place of my own, a home, someone to share it with. He gestured around them. Maybe this isn't the way I pictured it, but if we're going to make this work, if you're willing to give me that chance, then it's not your farm anymore. It's ours, and I take care of what's mine. The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed her, should have raised every warning flag that she'd cultivated during her years as an independent widow. But somehow, coming from Jonas, it felt different. Not controlling, but protective. Not taking, but offering. Our farm, she said quietly, testing the words. They felt strange on her tongue, but not wrong. All right, Jonas, our farm. His answering smile was radiant. That afternoon they rode into Pine Hollow together on the wagon. Evelyn handled the reins while Jonas sat beside her, once again, hunched slightly as though trying to minimize his presence. The town came into view gradually. The same collection of buildings she saw every week, but somehow different now, seen through Jonas's eyes. The general store bustled with afternoon business. As they entered, Jonas performing his now familiar awkward entrance. Conversation died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward them, curious and assessing. Well now, called out Jim Bradley from near the hardware section, if it isn't the giant and his lady. Jim Bradley, mind your manners. Mrs. Pritchard appeared from behind a display of canned goods, her eyes bright with interest. Good afternoon, Mr. Pike. Evelyn dear, how are you settling in? Fine, thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. Evelyn felt Jonas tense beside her and placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. Robert emerged from the back room, arms loaded with lumber samples. Jonas, right on time. Let's talk about what you need. For the next hour, Jonas transformed before Evelyn's eyes. Gone was the awkward, self-conscious giant. In his element, discussing construction and materials, he became confident and knowledgeable. He knew precisely what he needed, could estimate measurements by eye, and asked intelligent questions about local wood types and their properties. Robert listened with growing respect, and gradually other men in the store began to drift over, drawn by the conversation. You worked construction then? Asked Samuel Chen, who owned a ranch 10 mi out. Among other things, lumber camps mostly, some barn building, general carpentry. My barn could use some work, Samuel said thoughtfully. Weather's been hard on it. Would you be interested in taking a look? I can pay. Jonas glanced at Evelyn, a question in his eyes. She nodded encouragingly. I'd be happy to, Jonas said. Once I finished repairs at Miss Evelyn's farm, his farm too now, isn't it? Jim Bradley spoke up. If you two are to be married. The store went silent again. Evelyn felt heat creep up her neck, but before she could respond, Jonas spoke quietly. If Miss Evelyn will have me, then yes. But that's for the lady to decide and for us to discuss in private, with respect, Mr. Bradley. There was no hostility in his tone, but there was unmistakable firmness. Jim had the grace to look abashed. Of course. Course. Didn't mean to pry. Mrs. Pritchard broke the tension with her usual efficiency. Robert, make sure you give them the good nails, not that batch you got last month at Bent if you looked at them wrong. And Jonas, dear, you should know that half the women in town have been asking about you. Not in any improper way, she added quickly, seeing Evelyn's expression. Just curious. We don't get many new settlers, especially not ones who need to duck through doorways. I appreciate the interest, ma'am, but I'm only here for one woman. Jonas looked at Evelyn as he said it, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. They left the store with the wagon loaded with supplies and several offers of additional work for Jonas. As they drove back toward the farm, the sun beginning its descent toward the mountains, Evelyn mulled over what had happened. You made quite an impression, she said finally. Did I? Jonas sounded genuinely surprised. I just talked about lumber. You talked like someone who knows what he's doing, and you stood up for yourself, for us when Jim Bradley got too familiar. That matters in a place like this. I didn't mean to be rude. You weren't. You were respectful but firm. There's a difference. Evelyn guided the horses around a rut in the road. Jonas, can I ask you something else? Always. What did you mean when you said you're only here for one woman? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, Miss Evelyn, I'm 32 years old. I've worked hard all my life, saved my money, tried to be a good man, but I've also been alone most of that time. Not because I wanted to be, but because finding someone who could see past this, he gestured at himself to the person inside, seemed impossible. When your letter came, when you wrote about the stars and your garden and losing someone you loved, I thought maybe you understood what it was like to feel out of place in the world. Maybe we could be out of place together. Evelyn's throat tightened with emotion. I did understand that. I do then. That's what I meant. I didn't come here looking for just any wife. I came here looking for you. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable silence full of possibility. Over the next 3 days, Jonas transformed the Hart farm. He rose before dawn and worked until dusk. His enormous frame bent over fence posts and roof beams with single-minded determination. He rebuilt the pigsty entirely, constructing something so solid it looked like it could withstand a tornado. He patched the barn roof, replacing rotten boards and shoring up the structure with new supports. He fixed the chicken yard fence, rehung the barn door, and even mended the broken latch that had bothered Evelyn for months. And he did it all while trying his best not to break anything in the house. Evelyn watched him work with growing admiration. Jonas Pike was the most diligent man she'd ever encountered. He never complained, never slowed, never cut corners. When she brought him water or food, he accepted it with quiet gratitude and immediately returned to his labor. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion economical and purposeful. But it was the small things that captured her heart. The way he'd carved a small perch for her favorite hen, who liked to roost separately from the others. The way he'd noticed her struggling with a stubborn jar lid and quietly modified her kitchen drawer so she could store a small pry bar there. The way he'd spent an entire evening reading aloud from her copy of Whitman's poetry, his deep voice transforming the words into music. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something precious and unexpected. On the 4th morning, Evelyn woke to find Jonas already outside, standing in front of the house with a measuring tape and a thoughtful expression. She threw a shawl over her nightgown and patted out onto the porch in her bare feet. "Jonas, what are you doing?" He looked up startled, then blushed furiously at her state of undress. "I'm sorry, Miss Evelyn. I didn't mean to wake you. I was just measuring." "Measuring what?" "The doorframe." He gestured at the front entrance. "I was thinking if you don't mind, I could widen it. Raise it up some too. Make it so I don't have to scrape through sideways every time." Evelyn descended the porch steps, the morning dew cold on her feet. "You want to modify my house?" "Oh, our house," Jonas corrected gently, "if you're still willing, and only if you want me to. I know it's Thomas's work, and I don't want to." "Jonas," she stopped him with a hand on his arm. Even through his shirt, she could feel the warmth of his skin, the solid strength of him. Thomas built this house for function, not sentiment. He'd be the first to say it should serve the people living in it. If you need a wider door, then widen the door. He looked down at her, and in the pale morning light, she saw vulnerability and hope wearing in his expression. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." "Then I'd like to start today. It won't take long, maybe 6-7 hours of work. I'll do it carefully. Preserve as much of the original frame as I can." "All right." Evelyn smiled up at him. "But first, breakfast. You can't rebuild my door frame on an empty stomach." As she turned to go back inside, Jonas caught her hand gently. "Miss Evelyn, thank you for giving me a chance, for letting me be useful. I know it's only been a few days, but I just want you to know I've never been happier." Standing there in her nightgown and shawl, her hand engulfed in his massive one, Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. The walls she'd built around her heart after Thomas's death, walls she'd thought were permanent, developing cracks. "Neither have I," she admitted softly, "and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I wasn't looking for happy. I was looking for help with the farm. Maybe some companionship I wasn't prepared for. She gestured helplessly between them. For this, Jonas's thumb brushed across her knuckles, the touch feather light despite his size. Whatever this is. Yes. Would it help if I told you I'm terrified too? He smiled woefully. I came here hoping we might tolerate each other. Maybe build a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. I wasn't prepared for wanting to hear you laugh, or watching you work in your garden and thinking you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, or lying awake at night hoping I'm not making a complete fool of myself. Evelyn's breath caught. You think I'm beautiful? Miss Evelyn, you're so beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. They stood there in the growing light, hands joined, the words hanging between them like a promise. Then Evelyn squeezed his hand and stepped back, suddenly conscious of how improper this all was. Breakfast, she managed. I'll make breakfast. Jonas's smile was understanding. I'll be inside shortly, just want to finish these measurements. In the kitchen, Evelyn moved through the familiar motions of cooking with shaking hands. Beautiful. He thought she was beautiful, not pretty or pleasant, but beautiful. Said with such sincerity it had stolen her breath. When was the last time someone had looked at her the way Jonas looked at her, as though she were something rare and precious? She was still processing when Jonas shuffled through the doorframe, soon to be widened, and took his customary seat at the table. They ate in companionable silence, but the air between them felt charged with possibility. True to his word, Jonas spent the day modifying the front entrance. Evelyn watched him work between her own chores, marveling at his skill. He removed the old frame carefully, preserving the wood where possible. Then he constructed a new frame, taller and wider, with supports that were both functional and surprisingly elegant. By late afternoon, when he hung the door back in place, the entrance looked like it had always been that way, just better. Try it, Evelyn urged. Jonas approached the doorway, and for the first time since arriving, he walked through it standing upright. No ducking, no scraping, no awkward shuffling, just a man walking into his home. He stood in the entryway, looking stunned. Then he walked back outside and came through again, as though testing whether the miracle would repeat. It did. I fit, he said quietly. I actually fit. You do. Evelyn found herself grinning. Welcome home, Jonas Pike. His expression crumbled into something raw and vulnerable. For a moment, she thought he might cry. Instead, he crossed the floor in 3 long strides and pulled her into a hug that lifted her completely off her feet. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. Thank you for making room for me. Evelyn wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself be held, feeling safer and more cherished than she had in years. This man, this gentle giant who'd traveled so far to find her, who worked himself to exhaustion to prove his worth. He'd somehow become essential to her in less than a week. When he finally set her down, both of them were blushing. Jonas cleared his throat awkwardly. I should probably wash up for dinner. Probably, but neither of them moved. They stood there in their parlor, caught in the gravity of whatever was building between them. Miss Evelyn, Jonas said finally, his voice rough. I'd like to court you properly. I know we're already living under the same roof, which isn't entirely proper, but I want to do this right. Take you on walks, maybe into town for socials, get to know you the way a man should know a woman he's hoping to marry. Would that be all right? I'd like that very much. That evening, after dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. Jonas had brought out the rocking chair from inside, one of the few pieces of furniture that could accommodate his size, while Evelyn perched on the porch rail. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation flowing as easily as it had in their letters. Tell me about the Northern Lights, Evelyn said. You wrote about them once, but I want to hear you describe them now. Jonas leaned back, his eyes distant with memory. It's like the sky is breathing, he said slowly. Great curtains of light, green and blue, and sometimes purple, rippling across the darkness, moving and shifting like living things. The first time I saw them, I was 12 years old, camping with my paw. I thought the world was ending. He laughed and told me the angels were dancing. Do you believe that? I don't know what I believe, but I know it made me feel small and big at the same time. Small because I was just one person under all that vastness. Big because I was alive to see it, to be part of something so beautiful. He looked at her. That's how you make me feel too. Evelyn's heart stuttered. "Jonas, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just want you to know. You make me feel like I'm part of something beautiful." In the gathering darkness, with the crickets beginning their evening song and the first stars appearing overhead, Evelyn made a decision. She rose from her perch and crossed to Jonas's chair, then settled herself on the arm of it, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You make me feel brave," she said quietly, "like maybe I could risk my heart again, and it wouldn't destroy me." Jonas's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers interlacing with her smaller ones. "I'll try my best not to destroy it, I promise you that." They sat together as night fell completely, two people who'd been alone for so long, learning what it meant to not be alone anymore. And in that moment, everything felt possible. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt both new and timeless, as though Evelyn and Jonas were discovering steps to a dance that had been choreographed long before they met. October arrived with a bite in the air that promised an early winter. And the Hart farm, their farm, Evelyn was learning to think of it, transformed under Jonas's steady attention into something that looked less like a widow's desperate struggle and more like a home. True to his word, Jonas courted her properly. On Sunday afternoons, after church services, where Reverend Morrison had taken to greeting Jonas with genuine warmth, and the congregation had mostly stopped staring, they would walk together through the cottonwood groves that lined the creek. Jonas would offer his arm with endearing formality, and Evelyn would take it, marveling at how small her hand looked tucked into the crook of his elbow. He told her stories about his childhood, about the brothers scattered across the territories, about a mother who taught him that gentleness was strength, not weakness. She used to say that any fool could break things, Jonas said one afternoon as they walked beneath trees ablaze with autumn color. But it took real strength to be careful with the world, to use your power to build instead of destroy. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She'd have liked you. He glanced down at Evelyn with that soft expression that still made her breath catch. She always said I'd find someone who saw past the surface to what mattered underneath. I think she'd be pleased I finally listened. Evelyn squeezed his arm. I wish I could have met her. Me too. They paused at a bend in the creek where the water pooled clear and still, reflecting the sky like polished glass. Jonas picked up a smooth stone and sent it skipping across the surface. 1, 2, 3, 4 perfect bounces before it sank. "Show off," Evelyn teased. "Years of practice. My brothers and I used to compete. I rarely won. Being big doesn't help with skipping stones, but I was persistent." He handed her a stone. "Your turn." Evelyn's attempt sank immediately. Jonas laughed, not unkindly, and spent the next 15 minutes teaching her the proper wrist motion, standing behind her with his hand guiding hers. It was the most physically close they'd been outside of that one impulsive hug, and Evelyn was acutely aware of his warmth at her back. The gentle pressure of his fingers around her wrist, the way his breath stirred her hair. "Now try," he murmured, and she released the stone. It skipped twice before disappearing beneath the surface. "Better." Jonas's enthusiasm was infectious. "You're a natural." "I'm really not, but I appreciate your optimism." On their walk back, they encountered Samuel Chen riding the property line between his ranch and the Hart farm. He pulled up his horse with a friendly wave. "Jonas, been meaning to catch you. That barn repair I mentioned, I'd like to take you up on it if you're still willing. Weather's turning and I need it. Done before snow flies." Jonas glanced at Evelyn, seeking permission, and she nodded encouragingly. "I can start next week if that suits you." "Perfect. I'll pay standard carpentry rates plus a bonus if you finish before the month's out." After Samuel rode off, Evelyn studied Jonas's profile. "You're going to be busy. Is that all right? I don't want to neglect our farm." "Our farm?" The word still sent a small thrill through her. "Jonas, we need the income and you need work that makes use of your skills. I think it's wonderful. I just don't want you to think I'm shirking my responsibilities to you." Evelyn stopped walking, tugging on his arm until he turned to face her. "Listen to me. You've done more work on this farm in 2 weeks than I managed in 6 months. The buildings are sound, the fences are secure, and I no longer wake up wondering what's going to fall apart next. If you can earn money using your carpentry skills, that benefits both of us. Don't you see? This is what partnership looks like. Jonas's eyes reflected the late afternoon sun, turning them almost silver. I'm not used to having a partner. Not really. I'm used to working alone, being alone, having someone who considers my needs and wants. He shook his head in wonder. It's strange. Good. Strange, but strange. I know exactly what you mean. That evening, as had become their custom, they sat together on the porch after dinner. The temperature had dropped enough that Evelyn wrapped herself in a heavy shawl, and Jonas had brought out an extra blanket without being asked. These twilight conversations had become the part of the day Evelyn treasured most. The hour when work was done and tomorrow's tasks hadn't yet crowded in, when they could simply exist together in comfortable companionship. Miss Evelyn, Jonas said suddenly, his voice careful, can I ask you something that might be too forward? You can ask me anything. What was he like, Thomas? He rushed on before she could respond. I don't mean to pry, and you don't have to answer if it's painful, but I'd like to know something about the man who built this house, who loved you before I did. Evelyn's heart stuttered at that casual before I did, but she let it pass for now, focusing instead on his question. Thomas was good, she said slowly, picking her words with care. Steady, reliable. He laughed easily and rarely got angry. He treated me with respect, listened when I spoke, never made me feel small or stupid. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But Jonas, he was also my first love. We married young, barely knowing each other. We grew into love rather than falling into it. Does that make sense? I think so. What I'm trying to say is that what I felt for Thomas was real and true, but it was also the only thing I knew. I have no other experience to compare it to. She looked at Jonas, whose face was carefully neutral in the fading light. And lately I've been wondering if maybe there are different kinds of love, different ways of feeling. What do you mean? Evelyn took a breath, committing to honesty. Thomas was comfortable, like a favorite sweater or a well-worn book. I loved him, but I was never nervous around him. Never felt my heart race when he walked into a room. Never lay awake at night thinking about his smile or the sound of his voice. She met Jonas's eyes. With you, I feel all of those things, and it terrifies me because I don't know if it's real, or if I'm just lonely, or if it's real. Jonas interrupted quietly. Whatever this is between us, it's real. I feel it too. You do, Miss Evelyn. I think about you constantly. When I'm working on the barn, I'm wondering if you've remembered to eat lunch. When I'm lying in that too-short bed upstairs, I'm listening for the sound of you moving around below, just wanting to know you're there. When you smile at me, really smile. I feel like I could lift this entire house on my shoulders. He leaned forward, his expression intense. So yes, it's real. At least for me, it is. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility and promise. Evelyn's mouth had gone dry, and her hands trembled slightly beneath the shawl. Jonas, she whispered, I think I'm falling in love with you. His sharp intake of breath was audible. You think, or you know? I know. I'm falling in love with you. I probably started falling the moment you got stuck in my doorframe and looked at me like you were afraid I'd send you away. Jonas stood abruptly from his chair, and for a moment Evelyn thought she'd said too much, pushed too hard, but then he was kneeling in front of her, bringing his face level with hers, and his hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness. Evelyn Hart, he said, dropping the formal address for the first time. I have been in love with you since the third letter you sent me when you wrote about sitting on your porch and feeling lonely despite being surrounded by stars. I came here already halfway gone, and every day since has only made it worse or better. I can't decide which. Jonas, let me finish, please. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, and she could feel the calluses on his skin, the strength he was holding so carefully in check. I love you. I love your courage and your kindness. I love how you tend your garden like it's full of children who need nurturing. I love how you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love how you look at me like I'm just a man, not a giant or a freak or something to be afraid of. Just a man who wants to make you happy. Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now, but she was smiling. You do make me happy. Happier than I thought I could be again. Then marry me for real this time, not just in theory. Let me be your husband in truth, not just some mail-order arrangement that we're both testing out. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. Yes, Evelyn said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely, yes. Jonas's smile could have lit the entire valley. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her from the chair as though she weighed nothing, and spun her in a circle that made her laugh and gasp and cling to his shoulders. When he finally set her down, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. We should tell Charlotte, Evelyn said. She'll be insufferable about having been right all along. Let her be insufferable. I don't care. Jonas kept his arms around her, clearly reluctant to let go. When should we do it? The wedding. Soon, before winter sets in completely, before I lose my nerve. You won't lose your nerve. How can you be so sure? Because you're the bravest person I know. He kissed her forehead gently, a promise of more to come. And because we're right for each other, I've never been more certain of anything. They announced their engagement the following Sunday after church services. Reverend Morrison beamed with approval. Martha Morrison hugged them both fiercely, and Charlotte burst into tears before launching into an immediate and detailed discussion of wedding plans that made Robert laugh, and Jonas look mildly terrified. We want something simple, Evelyn tried to interject. Clear's throat. Nonsense. This is a celebration. We'll have it at the church naturally, with a reception at our house. I'll coordinate food with the other ladies. Evelyn, you'll need a new dress. Don't argue with me. You'll need a new dress. And Jonas, we'll need to see if there's a suit in town that will fit you, though we might have to send to Cheyenne. Charlotte, breathe, Robert suggested mildly, but the enthusiasm was contagious. As word spread through the congregation, well-wishers surrounded them with congratulations. Mrs. Pritchard declared she'd make her famous wedding cake. Jim Bradley offered to provide music on his fiddle. Even old Silas Creek shook Jonas's hand solemnly and told Evelyn she'd chosen well. Town's taking ownership of your happiness, Jonas murmured in Evelyn's ear as they finally escaped to their wagon. They're good people. They've looked after me since Thomas died. They just want to see me settled. Are you settled? I mean, Evelyn considered the question as Jonas helped her onto the wagon seat. Was she settled? 2 weeks ago, she would have said her life was as settled as it would ever be. A quiet existence of routine and solitude, managing her grief in her farm with equal determination. Now everything had changed. Now there was Jonas taking up space in her home and her heart, disrupting her carefully constructed equilibrium in the best possible way. I'm not settled, she said finally. I'm happy. There's a difference. Jonas's answering smile was worth every uncertainty, every risk, every moment of fear that had preceded this one. The week before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Charlotte had indeed taken charge, organizing the town women into a formidable planning committee that descended upon Evelyn's house with fabric samples and menu suggestions. Jonas escaped most of this by throwing himself into the Chen barn repair, leaving before dawn and returning after dusk, exhausted but satisfied. How's the barn coming? Evelyn asked one evening as he washed up at the kitchen pump. Good. Should be finished tomorrow. Samuel's pleased with the work. Jonas dried his hands on a towel, and Evelyn noticed fresh blisters on his palms. He's already mentioned it to some other ranchers. I might have steady work through winter if I want it. Do you want it? Depends. Do you need me here? Evelyn crossed the kitchen to take his hands in hers, studying the evidence of his labor. Jonas, I need you to be happy. If working carpentry makes you happy, then yes, I want you to do it. We'll figure out the farm work together. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. This had become her favorite place to stand, wrapped in his arms, sheltered by his size, feeling simultaneously protected and cherished. 3 more days, Jonas murmured into her hair. 3 more days and you'll be my wife. Getting nervous, terrified. What if I step on your dress during the ceremony? What if I knock something over at the reception? What if, Jonas? Evelyn pulled back enough to look up at him. You're not going to ruin anything. And if you do knock something over, we'll laugh about it and move on. Nothing that happens on our wedding day will change how I feel about you. How do you feel about me? His voice was soft, vulnerable, like you're too tall for the doorframe, but exactly right for my heart. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest into hers. That's the most ridiculous thing anyone has ever said to me. It's also true. Yeah, he agreed, smiling down at her. It is 2 days before the wedding. A late-season storm rolled over the mountains with unexpected ferocity. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind howling around the house and rain drumming against the windows with relentless intensity. By mid-morning, the temperature had dropped precipitously and the rain had turned to sleep. "This is bad," Jonah said, standing at the parlor window and watching the storm with concern. "Really bad. If this keeps up and gets colder, we could be snowed in by tomorrow. Surely it'll pass. It's only October." But the storm didn't pass. By afternoon, the sleet had indeed turned to snow, thick, wet flakes that came down in sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. The wind drove the snow into drifts that piled against buildings and fence lines with alarming speed. Evelyn tried to remain calm, but she'd lived in Wyoming long enough to know what an early blizzard could mean. "I need to check on the animals," she said, pulling on her warmest coat. "You're not going out in this." Jonas's voice was firm. "I'll go. You stay here where it's warm." "Jonas, they're my animals. Our animals, and I'm bigger, which means I'm less likely to get blown away or lost in a drift. Please, Evelyn, let me do this." She wanted to argue, but the worry in his eyes stopped her. "All right, but be careful. Tie a rope from the porch to the barn so you can find your way back." He kissed her forehead quickly. "Smart thinking. I'll be back soon." Watching him disappear into the white maelstrom, made nearly invisible within seconds despite his size, Evelyn felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She kept herself busy stoking the fire, preparing coffee, trying not to watch the clock. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. By the time Jonas finally stumbled back through the door, covered head to toe in snow and ice, 45 minutes had elapsed, and Evelyn was pacing the parlor like a caged animal. "Where were you?" she demanded, relief making her sharp. "I was about to come after you." "Sorry," Jonas's teeth were chattering. "Took longer than expected. The barn door had blown open. Had to secure it properly, and one of the pigs got out somehow. Spent 20 minutes tracking it down in the snow." "You spent 20 minutes looking for a pig in a blizzard?" "It's our pig, Evelyn. I wasn't going to let it freeze." She wanted to scold him for risking himself over livestock, but the chattering of his teeth stopped her. "Get those wet clothes off. I'll heat water for coffee. You're half frozen." While Jonas changed upstairs, Evelyn prepared hot coffee laced with precious sugar and set out blankets by the fire. When he returned, wearing dry clothes but still shivering, she wrapped him in blankets and forced the hot mug into his hands. "Drink." He obeyed, and gradually the shivering subsided. Color returned to his face. He looked at her with chagrin. "I scared you. You terrified me," Evelyn corrected. "Jonas, you can't." She stopped, taking a breath. "You're going to be my husband, which means I need you safe. The animals are important, but they're not worth your life." "I know. I'm sorry." He set down the mug and reached for her hand. "I just wanted to take care of things, to be useful." "You are useful. You're essential. Don't you understand that yet?" He pulled her down to sit beside him by the fire, and they huddled together under the blankets, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind shrieked like something alive and furious. Snow piled against the windows, blocking out light. And still it came down hour after hour until the world outside was nothing but white chaos. "If this doesn't stop," Jonas said quietly, "the roads will be impassable by morning." "What about the wedding?" "I don't know." They sat in worried silence as the afternoon darkened toward evening. Evelyn prepared a simple dinner, but neither of them had much appetite. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it intensified as night fell, the wind screaming with renewed fury. "We should go to bed," Evelyn said finally. "Nothing we can do about it tonight." But sleep was elusive. Evelyn lay in her bed listening to the storm and thinking about the wedding that might not happen, the plans that might be ruined. She thought about Jonas upstairs, probably lying awake with the same worries. And she thought about how, in the grand scheme of things, the timing of their wedding mattered far less than the fact of it. They would marry eventually. The exact date was just details. Somewhere past midnight, she heard Jonas moving around upstairs, then his footsteps on the stairs, careful and quiet. She sat up in bed just as his knock came at her door. "Evelyn, are you awake? Come in." He opened the door, and in the dim light from the dying fire, she could see his worried expression. "I can't sleep, and I heard you moving around, so I thought maybe you couldn't either." "I can't. Mind if I sit with you just for a bit?" He gestured to the chair beside her bed. "I don't want to be improper, but I also don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now. Sit, please." He settled into the chair, which creaked alarmingly under his weight, and they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the storm continued its assault. "Jonas," Evelyn said finally, "if we can't have the wedding on Sunday, if the roads are too bad and the church is snowed in, I want you to know it doesn't matter. We'll marry when we can. The date doesn't change anything." "I know, but I wanted to do this right, to give you a proper wedding with the town there, to make it official and public, so everyone knows you're my wife. Everyone already knows I'm going to be your wife. A ceremony is just making it legal and blessed by the church. The important part, the part where we choose each other, that's already happened." Jonas reached for her hand in the darkness. "You're the most sensible woman I've ever met. I'll remind you of that next time Charlotte accuses me of being stubborn." He laughed softly, and the sound eased some of the tension in the room. They talked quietly for another hour about nothing and everything, until finally exhaustion overtook worry. Jonas stood to return to his room, but at the door he paused. "Evelyn, yes, I love you. Storm or no storm, wedding or no wedding, that doesn't change. I love you too." Morning brought a surprise. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a transformed world. Evelyn woke to brilliant sunlight reflecting off what looked like 4 feet of fresh snow. The landscape was unrecognizable, drifts piled against buildings in smooth sculptured curves, every fence post topped with a perfect white cap. The entire valley glittering like it had been dusted with diamond powder. It was breathtakingly beautiful. It was also completely impassable. Jonas stood at the parlor window already dressed, his expression grim. "Roads buried. No one's getting anywhere until this melts or someone can break through with a plow." "How long do you think?" "Days, maybe. Depends on the temperature." He turned to her. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I know how much the wedding meant to you. It'll still happen, just later than planned." But despite her brave words, disappointment sat heavy in her chest. Charlotte would be heartbroken. The dress she'd commissioned from Cheyenne, the cake Mrs. Pritchard had promised, the decorations, all of it on hold indefinitely. They spent the day digging out from the storm, clearing paths to the barn and chicken coop, checking on animals, ensuring structures hadn't been damaged by the wind and weight of snow. It was hard, exhausting work, and by evening they were both spent. "At least we're together," Jonas said as they collapsed onto the porch steps, too tired to care about the cold. "We could have been separated by this. You hear me stuck in town if I'd been working. Instead, we weathered it together." Evelyn looked at him, at this man who'd become so essential to her so quickly, and felt a rush of gratitude. "You're right. And Jonas, I've been thinking, we don't need the church or the town or Charlotte's elaborate plans. We just need each other and someone to officiate." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Reverend Morrison lives half a mile from here. And I'm guessing he snowed in too. But once we can dig out enough to travel, we could go to him, have a private ceremony, just us and the Reverend and Martha as witnesses. Then when the weather clears and the roads open, we can have Charlotte's big celebration." "But we'd already be married." Jonas stared at her. "You do that? Give up the fancy wedding?" "Jonas, I don't need fancy. I just need you. And I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of sleeping in separate rooms and maintaining propriety when what I really want is to be your wife in every sense of the word. So yes, I do that if you would." His smile started slow and built into something radiant. "Evelyn Hart, you are full of surprises, and yes, absolutely yes, let's do it." The next 2 days were spent in frantic activity. They worked from dawn until dark, clearing a path from their farm toward the Morrison place. It was back-breaking labor. The snow was heavy and wet, the drifts deep, and every foot of progress felt hard-won. But they worked together, taking turns with the shovel, encouraging each other when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. On the 3rd day after the storm, they finally broke through to the Morrison property. The Reverend answered their knock, looking tired but pleased to see them. "Thank heavens you're both all right. We've been worried, unable to check on anyone." His eyes moved between them. "What brings you here? Is something wrong?" "Actually," Evelyn said, "we'd like to get married today if possible. Right now, if you're willing." Martha Morrison appeared behind her husband, her face lighting up with delight. "Oh, oh, how romantic. Henry, you have to do it right now. Don't make them wait another moment." And so, in the Morrisons' modest parlor, with no fancy dress or elaborate cake, with no town gathering or Charlotte's meticulous planning, Evelyn Hart and Jonas Pike were married. The ceremony was simple and brief. Evelyn wore her Sunday dress. Jonas wore the suit he traveled in, slightly rumpled but clean. Martha cried happy tears. Reverend Morrison spoke about love and commitment and partnership with the comfortable authority of a man who'd seen many marriages and knew which ones would last. When Jonas slipped the simple gold band purchased weeks ago in cautious hope onto Evelyn's finger, his hands trembled. When he kissed her for the first time as her husband, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Morrison said with satisfaction. "And may I say, you two are absolutely right for each other." Walking back to their farm through the snow, now as husband and wife, Evelyn felt a peace settle over her that she hadn't known she was missing. Jonas held her hand, helping her over the difficult patches, and when they finally reached their property, he swept her into his arms without warning. "Jonas, what are you doing carrying my wife over the threshold? It's tradition. We've both been through that door 100 times. Not as my wife, you haven't." He carried her through the newly widened doorframe into the house that was now truly theirs and set her down gently in the parlor. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her properly deeply, with all the restrained passion of the past weeks finally given permission to surface. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn smiled up at her husband. "Welcome home, Mr. Pike. Welcome home, Mrs. Pike," he answered. And the sound of her new name sent a thrill through her that promised many more thrills to come. Outside, the snow continued to blanket the valley in pristine white. But inside, by the fire, two people who'd been too tall and too lonely and too afraid of being hurt again found exactly what they needed in each other. And if the doorframe had been too small before, well, they'd simply made it bigger. Because that's what you did when something mattered. You made room. You adjusted. You built something new together that was stronger than what came before. And as darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the clearing sky, Jonas and Evelyn Pike began their married life with hope, with love, and with the certain knowledge that they'd found in each other something worth every risk they'd taken to get here. The first week of marriage passed in a haze of discovery and adjustment that left them both dizzy with happiness and occasional awkwardness. Evelyn woke that first morning to find Jonas already awake beside her, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "How long have you been staring at me?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Not long, maybe an hour." He grinned at her shocked expression. "I'm joking, maybe 15 minutes. I just wanted to make sure I didn't dream last night." "You didn't dream it?" She reached up to touch his face, still marveling that she was allowed this intimacy. "Now I'm really your wife. Best thing that ever happened to me," he murmured, leaning down to kiss her forehead, then her nose, then finally her mouth, with a gentleness that made her toes curl. They eventually emerged from the room to face the day's necessities, and the reality of being snowed in together settled over them with both challenges and unexpected pleasures. The storm had left them isolated from the world, trapped in their own small universe, where the only concerns were keeping warm, fed, and the animals tended. It forced an intimacy that might have taken months to develop under normal circumstances. Jonas proved himself a surprisingly competent cook, having learned by necessity during his years in lumber camps. He made pancakes that were only slightly burned and coffee that was considerably better than Evelyn's own attempts. She in turn showed him how to properly knead bread dough, laughing when his enormous hands turned the simple task into an exercise in restraint. "I feel like I'm wrestling something that's fighting back," he complained, flour dusting his arms up to the elbows. "You're being too aggressive. Bread needs a gentle touch." Like this, she demonstrated, her small hands working the dough with practiced ease. "See, firm but kind. That's how you approach everything, isn't it?" Jonas watched her with that soft expression again. Firm but kind. Is that a compliment or criticism? Definitely a compliment. It's one of the things I love most about you. These small moments of domesticity interspersed with long conversations by the fire and stolen kisses in the kitchen woo them together in ways Evelyn hadn't anticipated. Marriage to Thomas had been comfortable from the start because they'd been so young, growing into adulthood together. But marriage to Jonas felt like deliberately choosing to intertwine two already formed lives, finding where they fit and adjusting where they didn't. On the third day of their isolation, as they worked together to clear more snow from around the barn, Jonah suddenly stopped and straightened, his expression alert. "Did you hear that?" Evelyn paused, listening. At first she heard nothing but the wind and the distant call of a crow. Then it came again, a sound that might have been human voices, faint and distorted by distance. "Someone's out there," Jonas said, already moving toward the sound. "Stay here." "Absolutely not." Evelyn grabbed her coat. "If someone's in trouble, they'll need help. Two of us are better than one." They made their way toward the road, following the sounds that grew gradually clear. Voices, definitely men's voices shouting, and then, as they crested a drift, they saw it. A wagon overturned in a massive snowbank, its contents scattered across the white landscape. Three men struggled to ride it, their efforts hampered by the depth of the snow and the awkward angle. "Hello," Jonas called out, waving his arm. "Need help?" The men turned, and Evelyn recognized one of them, William Fletcher, owner of the dry goods warehouse in Pine Hollow. His face was red with cold and exertion. "Pike, thank God. We've been stuck here for over an hour. Tried to get through to Cheyenne before the storm hit. Didn't make it back in time. Wagon went off the road in the blizzard, and we couldn't ride it." Jonas was already waiting through the snow toward them. "What are you carrying?" "Medical supplies for Doc Morrison. He put in an order 2 weeks ago. Fever medicine, bandages, some surgical tools. It's urgent. There's been sickness in town." Evelyn felt her stomach clench. Sickness in Pine Hollow meant everyone was at risk, including Charlotte and Robert. "How bad?" William shook his head grimly. "Bad enough. Started with the Morrison kids, spread to about a dozen others. Doc says it's influenza, maybe pneumonia in the worst cases. He needs these supplies." Jonas had reached the wagon and was assessing the situation with his practiced carpenter's eye. "This is wedged in pretty good. We'll need to dig it out some before we can lift it. You men have shovels too. All right, start digging out the front wheels. I'll work on the back." He glanced at Evelyn. "Can you check the scattered supplies? Make sure nothing's damaged." For the next 2 hours they worked in the bitter cold. The men dug while Jonas used his considerable strength to gradually shift the wagon's angle. Evelyn gathered supplies from the snow, checking each item and repacking them carefully. Her fingers grew numb despite her gloves, and her back ached from bending, but she kept working. Clear's throat. Somewhere in Pine Hollow, children were sick. Charlotte might be sick. These supplies could save lives. Finally, with a great heave from Jonas and a coordinated push from the other men, the wagon came free of the snowbank and settled upright on its wheels. William Fletcher pumped Jonas's hand gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you. We'd have been here until spring without your help." "No thanks needed. Just get those supplies to Doc Morrison as fast as you can." Jonas turned to Evelyn. "We should go with them into town, check on Charlotte and the others." Evelyn nodded, already thinking through what they'd need. "We can hitch our wagon, take our own supplies. People will need food, extra blankets if they're sick." They worked quickly, loading their wagon with everything they could spare, preserves from the cellar, dried meat, the extra quilts from the chest upstairs, even the last of Evelyn's precious coffee. By the time they joined William Fletcher's party on the road to Pine Hollow, the sun was already declining toward the western peaks. The journey that normally took 30 minutes stretched to nearly 2 hours as they navigated snow-choked roads and treacherous drifts. But finally, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Pine Hollow came into view. The town looked smaller somehow, huddled beneath its blanket of snow, smoke rising from chimneys and thin grey ribbons. They found Doc Morrison's office overflowing with patients. The doc himself, a spare man in his 60s with kind eyes and capable hands, looked exhausted but visibly relieved when William Fletcher brought in the crates of supplies. "Thank God." I've been rationing what I have left, but we were down to almost nothing. He noticed Jonas and Evelyn in the doorway. Mrs. Pike and your new husband, if the rumors are true. Congratulations, though I wish you were visiting under better circumstances. How bad is it, Doc? Evelyn asked. Could be worse. Mostly children so far. A few adults, high fevers, coughing, some having trouble breathing. I've got the worst cases here, but there are others at home being tended by family. He paused, his expression grave. Your sister's boy is here, little Robert Jr. He took a bad turn yesterday. Evelyn's heart plummeted. Where's Charlotte? With him in the back room. Go on. They found Charlotte sitting beside a small cot where her 3-year-old son lay frighteningly still, his breathing labored and raspy. Charlotte looked up as they entered, and Evelyn barely recognized her sister. All of Charlotte's usual vivacity had been stripped away, leaving only a mother's raw terror. Eve. Charlotte's voice broke. He won't wake up properly. He's so hot and his breathing. She couldn't finish. Evelyn dropped to her knees beside the cot, taking her nephew's small hand. The child's skin was burning to the touch, his cheeks flushed with fever. How long has he been like this? 2 days. It started with a cough, then the fever came. Doc says his lungs are filling with fluid. Charlotte's eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. I can't lose him, Evie. I can't. Jonas, who'd been standing quietly in the doorway, moved into the room. What does Doc Morrison need? What can we do? Charlotte looked up at him, seeming to register his presence for the first time. He needs people. Everyone's sick or caring for someone sick. He can't be everywhere at once. He needs help keeping the children cool, getting fluids in them, watching for changes. Then that's what we'll do. Jonas looked at Evelyn. If you want to stay here with your sister, I can help Doc Morrison with the other patients. I'm strong enough to move people if needed, and I can follow instructions. Doc Morrison appeared in the doorway as if summoned. You offering to help, Pike? Yes, sir. Whatever you need. Can you take orders without arguing? Yes, sir. Then you're hired. No pay except my gratitude, but I suspect that's not why you're offering anyway. The doc's tired face creased in a small smile. Come with me. I'll show you what needs doing. Over the next 3 days, Jonas Pike became an unlikely hero in Pine Hollow. He worked tirelessly under Doc Morrison's direction, moving patients, fetching supplies, holding down fevered children while the doc administered treatment. His size, which had once made him an object of curiosity, became an asset. He could lift adult patients as though they weighed nothing, making it easier to change bedding or reposition them for breathing. He could reach high shelves without a ladder, carry multiple buckets of water without strain, work for hours without complaint, and his gentle nature, so at odds with his imposing physical presence, made him perfect for working with frightened children. He would sit beside their Cs, his massive hand holding their tiny ones, and tell them stories in his deep, rumbling voice until they calmed. The parents watched with amazement as their terrified, fevered children responded to this giant with trust and affection. Evelyn divided her time between helping Doc Morrison and staying with Charlotte at little Robert Jr.'s bedside. The boy's condition remained critical. His fever wouldn't break despite cold compresses and careful administration of fever medicine. His breathing grew more labored each day, a terrible rattling sound that haunted Evelyn's dreams during the brief hours she managed to sleep. On the 3rd night, Evelyn found Jonas outside the medical office, leaning against the wall in the darkness, his face buried in his hands. She approached quietly, touching his arm. Jonas, are you all right? He looked up and she saw tears tracking through the grime on his face. The Henderson baby died an hour ago. She was 6 months old. I was holding her when she stopped breathing. I felt her go. Evelyn's heart broke for him. She pulled him into her arms as well as she could, given their height difference, and let him hold on to her while his shoulders shook with silent sobs. This man who'd worked himself to exhaustion, trying to save people, who'd given everything he had to a town that had only recently stopped staring at him like a curiosity, was breaking under the weight of loss. It's not your fault, she whispered. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough. She was so small, Evelyn, so small and helpless, and I couldn't. His voice broke. They stood together in the cold darkness, sharing grief, until gradually Jonas's breathing steadied. He pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. I'm sorry. I shouldn't fall apart like this. People need me to be strong. Jonas, you are strong. But strength doesn't mean you can't feel. It doesn't mean you can't grieve. She held his face between her hands. What you're doing here, helping these people, caring about them, that's what makes you extraordinary. Don't apologize for having a heart. He kissed her then, desperately, as though she were the only solid thing in a world gone mad. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. How's little Robert? The same. Charlotte's beside herself. Robert Sr. is trying to hold everything together, but I can see he's terrified too. I should get back inside. Doc Morrison will need me soon. Jonas, you've been working for 3 days straight. You need to rest. I'll rest when this is over, when we know everyone who can be saved has been saved. He squeezed her hand. Go back to your nephew. Be with your sister. I'll be fine. But he wasn't fine, and neither was anyone else. The epidemic continued its relentless march through Pine Hollow. More children fell ill. Another death followed the Henderson baby, old Silas Creek, whose aged body couldn't fight off the infection. The town began to feel like it was under siege, every household touched by sickness or fear. It was on the 4th night that the miracle happened. Evelyn had dozed off in a chair beside little Robert's cot, exhausted beyond measure. Charlotte had finally been convinced to sleep in a real bed, leaving Evelyn to watch over the boy. She woke to a sound she'd been praying to hear. The child crying, not the weak, barely there whimpers he'd been making for days. Real crying, loud, indignant, healthy crying. She bolted upright to find little Robert sitting up in bed, tears streaming down his face, looking confused and irritated. "Mama," he wailed. "Want Mama?" Evelyn's hand shook as she felt his forehead. Cool. The fever had broken. His breathing, while still congested, was noticeably easier. The terrible rattle was gone. "Charlotte," she screamed. "Charlotte, come here." Her sister burst through the door, wild-eyed, expecting the worst. Instead, she found her son reaching for her, crying for her beautifully, wonderfully alive. Charlotte scooped him into her arms, sobbing with relief, and Evelyn had to sit down as her legs gave out. Doc Morrison appeared moments later, drawn by the commotion. He examined the boy with efficient gentleness, then straightened with a satisfied nod. "Fever's broken, lungs are clearing. He'll need rest and careful watching, but I believe he's past the crisis." The doc's tired face split into a genuine smile. "This is what we've been waiting for. The first real turn for the better." And it was. Over the next 2 days, more fevers broke. More children woke crying for their mothers, their breathing easier, their color returning. The medicine from Cheyenne, administered carefully by Doc Morrison, was finally winning the battle. Not everyone survived. 3 more deaths followed, each one a tragedy that cut through the community, but the tide had turned. By the end of the week, Pine Hollow began to breathe again. Families who'd been isolated by illness emerged cautiously, looking for news of neighbors. The general store reopened. People gathered, in small groups on the street, keeping distance, but desperate for human connection after days of fear. Jonas and Evelyn finally returned to their farm on a bright morning that felt like the world had been washed clean. They were both exhausted, moving like sleepwalkers through the familiar routine of checking on animals and starting a fire. Neither spoke much. There was too much to process, too many emotions still too raw. That evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jonas broke the silence. "I've never felt so helpless in my life, and I've never felt more useful, both at the same time." Evelyn understood completely. "You saved lives, Jonas. Doc Morrison told me you were the best assistant he's ever had, that you kept calm when everyone else was panicking, that you were exactly what he needed. 3 children died, and Mr. Creek and the Henderson baby. His voice was flat, haunted, and a dozen others lived because you were there to help. Because you didn't give up, because you cared enough to work yourself to exhaustion trying to save them." She moved to sit on the arm of his chair the way she had that first week and ran her fingers through his hair. "Jonas, you can't save everyone, but you saved the ones you could. That has to be enough." He pulled her into his lap, holding her tightly. "When I saw you with your nephew, when I thought about what Charlotte was going through, all I could think was that someday that might be us. Our child fighting for breath. Our family torn apart by something we can't control. It terrified me. It terrifies me too, Evelyn admitted. But Jonas, that's life. That's the risk of loving anyone, of building a life together. Something could always go wrong. Someone could always get sick or hurt or taken from us. We can't let fear of that possibility stop us from living. I know. He stopped, then started again. I love you so much. It scares me. If anything happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. Then it's a good thing I'm not planning on going anywhere. She kissed him softly. We're going to be fine, Jonas. We're going to build a life here, raise children if we're blessed with them, grow old together on this farm. And yes, there will be hard times, but we'll face them together the way we face this epidemic. Together. He held her for a long time, and gradually she felt the tension leave his body. Outside, the stars came out one by one, filling the Wyoming sky with the same beauty that had comforted Evelyn during her lonely widow years. But now she wasn't lonely. Now she had Jonas, this gentle giant who loved her with his whole heart, who worked himself to exhaustion for people he barely knew, who cried when babies died and rejoiced when they lived. The next Sunday, Pine Hollow held a memorial service for those lost to the epidemic. The church was packed, every pew filled with people who'd survived or lost loved ones. Reverend Morrison spoke about grief and gratitude, about the fragility of life and the strength of community. And when he asked the congregation to stand and recognize those who'd helped during the crisis, every eye turned to Jonas Pike. Jonas, who tried to make himself small in the back pew. Jonas, who blushed furiously as people turned to look at him. Jonas, who clearly wanted to disappear through the floor. This man, Reverend Morrison said, his voice carrying through the church, worked for 5 days straight with almost no sleep. He held sick children, moved patients, fetched supplies, and never once complained or asked for anything in return. Doc Morrison tells me that without Jonas Pike's help, we would have lost more lives. Many more lives. The congregation began to applaud, a sound that built and built until it filled the small church with thunder. Jonas looked like he wanted to die of embarrassment. But Evelyn gripped his hand tightly and refused to let him shrink away from the recognition he deserved. After the service, people mobbed them outside the church. Men shook Jonas's hand with genuine gratitude. Women hugged Evelyn and thanked her for her help with their children. Charlotte and Robert were there with little Robert Jr., who reached for Jonas with chubby arms. Up, the boy demanded. Big man, up. Jonas lifted the child carefully, and little Robert giggled with delight at being so high off the ground. Charlotte watched with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said to Jonas, for everything you did, for being there when we needed you, for being exactly the kind of man Evelyn deserves. I didn't do anything special, Mrs. Sullivan. You did everything special. Charlotte smiled through her tears. And I'm sorry I ever called you a walking telegraph pole. You're a good man, Jonas Pike. The best. The town's attitude toward Jonas shifted, completely after the epidemic. No more curious stares or whispered comments about his size. Instead, people greeted him by name, stopped to chat on the street, sought his advice on building projects. Samuel Chen spread the word about Jonas's carpentry skills, and soon Jonas had more work than he could handle. Barn repairs, house additions, new construction. You're becoming a pillar of the community, Evelyn teased one evening, as Jonas sorted through yet another request for his services. It's strange, he admitted. I've never belonged anywhere before. Never felt like people wanted me around for anything other than my ability to lift heavy things. But here you're home, Evelyn finished. Here, you're not just Jonas Pike, the big man. You're Jonas Pike, our neighbor, our friend, the man who helps when help is needed. Our husband, he added, pulling her close. Don't forget that part. Never, she promised. As November gave way to December, the Hart farm settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jonas worked carpentry jobs during the day, while Evelyn managed the farm and took on sewing work from town. In the evenings they cooked together, read together, talked about their plans for spring planting and summer expansion. They were building a life together brick by brick, moment by moment. And on a cold December night, as the first real snow of winter began to fall, Evelyn sat Jonas down by the fire with a nervous smile. I have something to tell you. He looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression immediately concerned. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Quite the opposite, actually. She took a deep breath. Jonas, I'm pregnant. For a moment he just stared at her, the words not quite registering. Then his face transformed. Shock giving way to wonder, giving way to joy so profound it made him look like a different person entirely. A baby? His voice cracked. We're having a baby? Yes. Doc Morrison confirmed it this afternoon. I'm about 6 weeks along. He thinks the baby should come sometime in July. Jonah set aside the harness with shaking hands and crossed to kneel in front of her chair. He placed his large palms on her still flat stomach with infinite gentleness. There's a baby in there, he whispered in awe. Our baby. Our baby. Evelyn confirmed, placing her hands over his. He looked up at her and she saw tears streaming down his face. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a wonderful father. What if I'm not? What if I'm too rough or too clumsy? What if the baby is scared of me because I'm so big, Jonas? She cupped his face in her hands. This baby is going to love you beyond measure, just like I do. They'll think you're the most magnificent thing in the world because you are the most magnificent thing in the world, and you won't be too rough because you're the gentlest man I know. That baby is the luckiest child alive to have you as a father. He pulled her into his arms, then holding her and their unborn child with fierce protectiveness. I love you, he murmured. I love you both so much. We love you too. They sat together by the fire as snow fell outside, dreaming about the future, about a child who might have Jonas's blue eyes or Evelyn's dark hair, about teaching them to skip stones on the creek and read poetry by lamplight, about watching them grow up on this farm surrounded by love and Wyoming sky. Do you think they'll be tall like me? Jonas asked eventually. Evelyn laughed. God help us if they are. We'll need to raise all the door frames again. Worth it, Jonas said immediately, every inch. And as the fire burned low and the snow piled high outside, Jonas and Evelyn Pike held each other and marveled at the strange and wonderful path that had brought them here. From a mail-order advertisement to a marriage of convenience, to something that had become so much more than either of them had dared to hope for. A man too tall for the doorframe, but exactly right for her heart. A woman brave enough to let him in, despite her fear. And now, a baby who would complete the family they were building together. The winner stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise. And for the first time in years, neither of them was afraid of what the future might bring. Because whatever came, they would face it together. Always together. Winter deepened its grip on Wyoming territory with a ferocity that tested even the hardiest settlers. The snows came in waves throughout December and January, each storm more brutal than the last. But inside the Pike household, warmth reigned in every sense of the word. Jonas became almost comically protective of Evelyn once her pregnancy became visible, insisting she rest more, work less, and allow him to handle tasks she'd been managing independently for years. Jonas, I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain, Evelyn protested one morning in late January as he literally lifted her away from the chicken coop. I've been feeding chickens since before you arrived, and now I'm here, so you don't have to. His jaw was set with stubborn determination. Doc Morrison said, you need to be careful, especially in this cold. Doc Morrison said, I need to stay active and healthy. There's a difference between careful and imprisoned in my own house. They stared at each other, wills clashing, until finally Jonas sighed and set her down gently. I'm sorry. I just worry every minute of every day. I worry about you, about the baby, about everything that could go wrong. Evelyn's irritation melted away. She took his face in her hand, standing on tiptoe, even though it barely helped with their height difference. I know you worry, but Jonas, you have to trust that I know my own body, my own limits. I'll tell you if I need help, I promise. But you can't wrap me in cotton wool for the next 6 months. 5 and 1 to 2 months. He corrected automatically, then smiled sheepishly. I've been counting. Of course you have. She kissed him softly. Now can we compromise? You handle the heavy work, the dangerous work, anything that requires climbing or lifting. I'll handle the chickens, the cooking, the lighter chores. Deal. Deal, he agreed reluctantly. But if you feel tired or sick or anything at all wrong, I'll tell you immediately. I promise. They settled into this new rhythm, learning to navigate the delicate balance between Jonas's protectiveness and Evelyn's independence. Charlotte visited weekly, bringing supplies and unsolicited advice about pregnancy that made Evelyn laugh, and Jonas turned various shades of red. "You need to massage her feet every evening," Charlotte announced during one visit, producing a worn book titled The Expectant Mother's Complete Guide. "It says here that swelling is common and foot massage provides relief." "Charlotte, my feet aren't swelling yet," Evelyn protested. "Prevention is key, dear sister. Jonas, are you listening? Foot massage every evening." Jonas, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, nodded dutifully. "Yes, ma'am." After Charlotte left, Evelyn found Jonas actually reading the borrowed book with intense concentration, his brow furrowed as he absorbed information about pregnancy stages, warning signs, and proper nutrition. "You're really reading that entire book, aren't you?" Evelyn asked, amused. "Knowledge is preparation," he said seriously. "If I know what to expect, I can help better." Did you know that some women experience cravings for unusual food combinations? The book says it's perfectly normal. "Jonas, I'm not going to start demanding pickles and ice cream in the middle of the night." 3 weeks later, she woke him at 2 in the morning with an overwhelming need for ham and strawberry preserves. He didn't say a word, just climbed out of bed and prepared exactly what she wanted, setting it before her with a small, knowing smile. "Don't," she warned, biting into the bizarre combination that somehow tasted perfect. "Don't you dare say I told you so." "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, but his eyes were laughing. As February arrived, bringing slightly warmer temperatures and the promise of eventual spring, disaster struck in an unexpected way. A rider came thundering up to their farm one afternoon, his horse lathered with sweat despite the cold. "Pike, Mr. Pike." The young man, barely 20, one of the ranch hands from the Chen property, practically fell off his horse in his urgency. "There's been an accident at the mountain pass. A wagon train. Families headed for California. They got caught in an avalanche. People are trapped. Mr. Chen sent me to fetch you and anyone else who can help dig them out." Jonas was already moving toward the barn before the boy finished speaking. "How many people?" "Don't know exactly. Maybe 20, including children. They're trapped under snow and debris. Mr. Chen says the pass is unstable, could come down again any time. But there are kids under there, sir. Little ones." Evelyn felt ice form in her stomach. "Jonas, you can't. If the pass is unstable, I have to." He was saddling his horse with swift efficiency. "Evelyn, there are children. I can't leave them to die." "You could die." Her voice cracked with fear. "That pass is a death trap when it's stable. After an avalanche, Jonas, please." He crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But I'm also the strongest man in Pine Hollow, maybe in the whole territory. If anyone can move the kind of debris that's probably blocking that path, it's me. Those children need me. I need you," she whispered against his chest. "Our baby needs you, and I'll come back to you both. I promise." He tilted her face up to look at him. "Evelyn, I have everything to live for now. I'm not going to take stupid risks, but I have to try. You understand that, don't you?" She did understand, even though every instinct screamed at her to chain him to the house and keep him safe. This was who Jonas was, a man who couldn't stand by when people needed help, who would risk himself to save others without a second thought. It was one of the things she loved most about him, and one of the things that terrified her most. "Come back to me," she said fiercely. "Jonas Pike, you come back to me, or I swear I'll never forgive you." "I'll come back." He kissed her deeply, desperately. "I love you. I love you too. Be careful. Please be careful." She watched him ride away with a growing dread that settled in her bones like winter cold. Charlotte arrived an hour later, having heard the news in town, and found Evelyn pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "He'll be fine," Charlotte said with more confidence than her expression suggested. "Jonas is smart and strong. He won't do anything foolish. He rode into an unstable mountain pass to dig people out of an avalanche. Charlotte, that's the definition of foolish. That's the definition of heroic. There's a difference." Charlotte guided her sister to a chair. "Sit down before you wear a hole in the floor. Getting yourself worked up isn't good for the baby." I can't help it. What if the pass comes down again while he's there? What if Evelyn couldn't finish the thought? They waited together as the afternoon dragged into evening. Other women from town began arriving, all with husbands or sons who'd gone to help with the rescue. Mrs. Pritchard brought bread and cheese, Martha Morrison brought tea and quiet prayers. They gathered in Evelyn's kitchen, these women who understood the particular terror of loving someone brave, and waited for news. It came near midnight when Robert Sullivan rode up with an exhausted horse and a grim expression that made Evelyn's heart stop. "He's alive," Robert said immediately, seeing her face. "Jonas is alive, Evelyn, but there's been a complication." "What kind of complication?" Her voice didn't sound like her own. "They got most people out, 17 survivors, 3 dead, all adults. But there's still one child trapped. A little girl, maybe 5 years old. She's wedged under a massive beam and rocks. They can't reach her without risking another collapse. The pass is too unstable. They've been trying for hours," but he shook his head. "They're talking about having to leave her." "No." Evelyn stood, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Jonas won't leave her. He'll die trying to save her before he leaves a child to die alone." "That's what we're afraid of," Robert said quietly. "Samuel Chen sent me to fetch you. He thought maybe you could convince Jonas to come home, to not throw his life away on what might be an impossible rescue." Charlotte grabbed Evelyn's arm. "Evie, you can't go up there in your condition, the ride alone. My husband is about to get himself killed trying to save a child." "I'm going." Evelyn pulled on her warmest coat with shaking hands. "Charlotte, I have to. If there's any chance I can make him see reason, then I'm coming with you." "Charlotte, no. Little Robert needs his mother, and your baby needs both parents." "I'm coming, and that's final." "Robert, saddle another horse." The ride to the mountain pass was brutal. Even taking it carefully to protect Evelyn, they pushed as hard as they dared through darkness, broken only by lantern light and a thin moon. Evelyn prayed continuously under her breath, bargaining with God in the way desperate people do, promising anything, everything. If only Jonas would be alive and whole. When she reached him, they heard the rescue operation before they saw it. Men shouting, the crack of breaking wood, the ominous rumble of shifting snow. As they crested the final rise, the scene below took Evelyn's breath away. Dozens of lanterns illuminated the chaos of the avalanche site. A massive snowfield stretched across the pass, studded with broken trees and wagon debris. Men swarmed over it like ants, digging, hauling, calling out warnings. And there, in the center of it all, was Jonas. Even from a distance, he was unmistakable, towering over every other man, covered in snow and dirt, his massive frame bent over what looked like a pile of timber and rock. As Evelyn and Charlotte approached on foot, having left the horses with a volunteer at the safe zone, she could hear his voice, low and steady, talking to someone beneath the debris. "I know you're scared, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But I'm going to get you out of there, I promise. Just keep talking to me." "Okay. Tell me about your dollies. What are their names?" A tiny voice, barely audible and weak with cold and fear, responded. "Rosie and Margaret and Annie. Those are beautiful names. I bet they're real pretty dollies." "Are they fancy with nice dresses?" "Rosie has a blue dress. It's my favorite." Evelyn felt tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband. This gentle giant talking to a trapped child about dolls while he slowly, carefully moved beams that would have required 3 normal men to lift. Samuel Chen noticed her arrival and moved quickly to intercept her. "Mrs. Pike, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Neither is my husband, apparently." She kept her eyes on Jonas. "How bad is it?" Samuel's expression was grim. "Bad. The beam pinning her is massive, and it's the only thing keeping a ton of snow and rock from sliding down on her. If we move it wrong, she'll be crushed before we can pull her out. We've tried everything we can think of. Jonas is our last hope. He's strong enough to lift the beam if anyone is, but even he can't hold it long enough for someone to crawl in and pull her free." "How long has he been at this?" 6 hours, maybe 7. "He won't leave her, Mrs. Pike. We've tried to relieve him, but he refuses. Says she's scared and needs to hear a familiar voice." Evelyn watched Jonas shift another piece of debris, his movements careful and precise despite what must clear his throat, be overwhelming exhaustion. His voice never stopped, maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation with the trapped child. My wife has a garden, grows the prettiest flowers you ever saw. Does your mama have a garden? Mama grows tomatoes. I don't like tomatoes. The little voice was getting weaker. I don't much like them either, Jonas admitted. But I like strawberries. You like strawberries? Yes, strawberries are good. When we get you out of here, we'll make sure you get some strawberries and maybe some hot cocoa. Does that sound nice? Yes, please. Evelyn couldn't stand by and watch any longer. She moved toward the rescue site, ignoring Samuel Chen's protests, and carefully picked her way across the unstable snow until she reached Jonas. He looked up at her approach, and his face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise, fear, anger, and finally resignation. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Neither should you. Not anymore, Jonas. You've been at this for hours. You need rest. Can't rest. She needs me. He turned his attention back to the beam, muscles straining as he lifted it another inch. Almost there, sweetheart. Just a little more and we can reach you. Keep talking to me. Tell me what you want to eat when you see your mama. Pancakes, the child whispered. With honey. Pancakes with honey it is. Jonas braced himself, his face contorting with effort as he lifted the beam higher. Evelyn, I need someone small enough to crawl through the gap and pull her out. I can hold this for maybe 30 seconds. Maybe. Jonas, no. If you lose your grip, I won't lose my grip. But I need someone now. Please. Evelyn looked at the gap forming beneath the beam, then at her own small frame, then at her husband's determined face. She knew what he was asking, knew what he wasn't saying, that she was the smallest adult there, small enough to fit through the narrow space to reach the child where larger rescuers couldn't. I'm pregnant, she said quietly. Jonas, I'm carrying our baby. I can't, I know. His voice broke. I know, and I hate asking this of you, but Evelyn, she's dying down there. I can feel her getting weaker. If we don't get her out in the next few minutes, it won't matter. Please, I'll hold that beam until my body breaks before I let it fall on you. Please trust me. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. He would die before he dropped that beam. Would hold it with his last breath if necessary. And suddenly she understood what this moment was about. Not just saving a child's life, though that was reason enough, but Jonas proving once and for all that his size and strength had purpose. That he'd been built this way for a reason. That all the years of feeling too big, too clumsy, too much had been leading to this moment when being giant made him exactly what was needed. 30 seconds, she said, and Jonas, don't you dare let that beam fall. Never, he promised. She kissed him quickly, then dropped to her stomach and began wriggling through the gap as Jonas lifted the beam higher with a roar of effort that echoed through the pass. The space was barely wide enough, debris scraping her sides, the weight of Jonas's strain palpable in the creaking wood above her head. But she focused on the small shape ahead of her, a little girl with blonde braids, her face straw with tears and dirt, her eyes enormous with terror and hope. Hi there, Evelyn said softly, reaching for the child. My name is Evelyn. That big man out there is my husband, Jonas. He's not going to let anything hurt you, I promise. Can you grab my hands? The little girl's grip was weak but determined. Evelyn began pulling her backward, working as quickly as she dared, conscious of every second ticking past. Above them, Jonas held the beam with supernatural strength, his entire body trembling with the effort. Come on, sweetheart. That's it. We're almost there. She could see the opening now, see men waiting to pull them clear, see Charlotte's terrified face watching from the safe zone. Just a few more feet. Just a little further, the beam groaned ominously. Evelyn. Jonas's voice was desperate. I'm losing it. Don't you dare. 3 more seconds. She gave one final pull, and suddenly hands were grabbing her, grabbing the child, hauling them both clear of the gap. The moment they were free, Jonas dropped the beam with a crash that shook the ground, then collapsed forward onto his knees, gasping for air. The little girl was already being wrapped in blankets, checked over by Doc Morrison, who'd been standing by. Evelyn scrambled to Jonas, who was still on his knees in the snow, his hands bleeding, his entire body shaking with exhaustion. You did it, she said, crying and laughing at once. Jonas, you did it. She's alive. He looked up at her and she saw tears cutting tracks through the dirt on his face. She's alive. She's alive because of you. Because you were strong enough and stubborn enough and brave enough to not give up. Because you trusted me. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. God. Evelyn, when I asked you to crawl in there, when I saw you going under that beam. Shh, we're both fine. We're all fine. She held his face, making him look at her. Jonas Pike, you are the bravest man I've ever known, and I love you more than words can say. He kissed her then, desperately, gratefully, while around them men cheered, and the little girl cried for her mother, who came running with sobs of joy. In that moment, under the cold Wyoming stars, with an unstable mountain pass threatening overhead and exhaustion pulling at them both, everything was perfect. The ride home took most of the night. Jonas was in no condition to travel quickly. His body pushed past reasonable limits, but he refused to stay at the rescue camp. He needed to be home, he said. Needed to sleep in his own bed with his wife beside him. Needed to know beyond doubt that they were both safe. Charlotte and Robert rode with them, keeping watch in case Jonas fell from his horse. But he stayed upright through sheer willpower. One hand gripping the reins and the other never letting go of Evelyn's hand as their horses walked side by side. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed, Charlotte said as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. And the most incredible, Jonas, what you did was necessary, he said simply. That's all. That's not all, Robert contradicted quietly. That was heroism, Pike, pure and simple. Word of this will spread. You'll be famous throughout the territory. Don't want to be famous. Just want to sleep for a week. When they finally reached the farm, Jonas practically fell off his horse. Robert and Charlotte helped him inside and into bed, where he was asleep before his head hit the pillow. Evelyn climbed in beside him, too exhausted to even remove her shoes, and wrapped herself around his battered body. Love you, Jonas mumbled, half asleep already. Love both of you. We love you too, she whispered. Now rest. You've earned it. In the days that followed, news of Jonas Pike's rescue spread exactly as Robert had predicted. The story grew with each telling. The giant who held a beam for minutes while his pregnant wife crawled beneath it to save a dying child. The man who'd worked for 8 hours straight moving debris that should have been impossible for one person. The hero of Pine Hollow who asked for no recognition and wanted only to go home to his family. People came from miles around to thank him, to shake his hand, to offer him work or money or anything he might need. Jonas endured it all with embarrassed grace, always deflecting praise and insisting he'd just done what anyone would do. Anyone with the strength of an ox and the heart of a saint, Doc Morrison corrected during one visit. Jonas, you need to learn to accept compliments. What you did was extraordinary. The extraordinary thing, Jonas said quietly, was that Evelyn trusted me enough to crawl under that beam. That took more courage than anything I did. But the recognition brought benefits. Beyond gratitude, job offers flooded in more than Jonas could possibly accept. Enough that he could be selective, choosing projects that interested him and paid well. By spring, the Pikes had more money saved than Evelyn had seen in years. Enough to make real improvements to the farm. Enough to prepare for the baby that was growing larger every day. As winter finally loosened its grip and March brought the first hints of warmth, they began making plans. Jonas built a nursery addition onto the house, working with careful precision to create a room that was both functional and beautiful. Evelyn sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating garments for a child she couldn't wait to meet. Charlotte threw herself into planning what she called a proper baby celebration over Evelyn's protests. You had your wedding interrupted by a blizzard, Charlotte insisted. We're not letting anything interfere with celebrating this baby. The celebration came in April, a month before Evelyn's due date. It seemed like the entire town gathered at the church hall with gifts and well wishes. Mrs. Pritchard's famous cake made an appearance. Jim Bradley played his fiddle while children danced and adults swapped stories. The little girl Jonas had rescued, Sarah Brennan, they'd learned, presented Evelyn with a handmade card decorated with crayon drawings of flowers and a very large stick figure that was clearly meant to be Jonas. That's the man who saved me, Sarah explained seriously. He's the biggest, bravest man in the whole world. Jonas, holding the card with hands that could palm a watermelon, looked like he might cry. "Thank you, Sarah. This is the nicest thing anyone's ever given me. You saved my life," the child said simply. "Mama says that makes you a hero. Your mama is very kind." As the celebration wound down and guests began departing, Reverend Morrison pulled Jonas and Evelyn aside with a thoughtful expression. "I've received a letter from the territorial governor," he said. "He's heard about the rescue at the pass. He wants to present you with a commendation for valor, Jonas. There's to be a ceremony in Cheyenne next month." Jonas looked horrified. "That's not necessary, Reverend. I just did what anyone should do, but few would have the courage to attempt." The Reverend finished. "Jonas, you represent the best of what people can be. Let the governor recognize that. Let the territory see that heroism isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing what's right when it's hard. I can't go to Cheyenne next month. Evelyn's due to have the baby any day. I won't leave her." "Then we'll wait," the governor's representative said, having apparently been invited to the celebration. "The ceremony can happen whenever you're ready. 6 months from now, a year, it doesn't matter. The recognition stands." Evelyn squeezed Jonas's hand. "We'll figure it out. But Jonas, you should accept. What you did deserves recognition." He cleared his throat, looked at her, then at the people around them. Neighbors who'd become friends, friends who'd become family. "All right," he said finally, "but not for 6 months at least. I need to be here for my family." The baby came on a scorching afternoon in late July, arriving 3 weeks early and in a tearing hurry that left Doc Morrison barely enough time to wash his hands. Jonas paced outside the bedroom, his footsteps shaking the house, while Charlotte and Martha Morrison assisted with the birth. Every cry from Evelyn sent him toward the door, only to be firmly turned back by whichever woman was standing guard. "You can't help in there," Charlotte told him firmly during one attempt. "You'll just get in the way now. Sit down before you wear a hole in the floor. I should be with her. She needs me. What she needs is space to work and experienced women to help. You'll see her soon enough." The hours dragged past with agonizing slowness. Jonas had never felt more useless in his life. He who could lift massive beams and work for days without rest could do nothing now while the woman he loved labored to bring their child into the world. He sat with his head in his hands, praying desperately for both of them while the summer sun crawled across the sky. Finally, as twilight painted the windows gold, a new sound joined the symphony of birth. A baby's cry, strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, her face straw with tears and split with a huge smile. "You have a daughter," she announced, "a beautiful, healthy baby girl, and Evelyn is fine. Tired, but fine." Jonas stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. "Can I see them? Give Martha a few more minutes to clean up. Then yes, you can meet your daughter." Those few minutes felt like hours, but finally Martha opened the door and beckoned him in. Jonas entered his bedroom, where Evelyn lay propped against pillows. Her hair damp with sweat and her face exhausted but radiant. And in her arms, wrapped in the blanket Evelyn had sewn herself, was the tiniest human being Jonas had ever seen. "Come meet your daughter," Evelyn said softly. He crossed to the bed on shaking legs and looked down at the baby. She was perfect, impossibly small, with a red wrinkled face and tiny fists that waved aimlessly in the air, dark hair like Evelyn's. And when she opened her eyes to look at him, they were the same pale blue as his own. "She's so little," he whispered, afraid to speak louder and startle her. "Evelyn, she's so small. What if I hurt her?" "You won't. Here." Evelyn shifted the bundle carefully into his arms. "Support her head. That's it. You're a natural." Jonas cradled his daughter with infinite care, this child who weighed perhaps 7 lebela, but felt more precious than anything he'd ever held. She studied his face with serious intensity, as though memorizing his features, and Jonas felt his heart crack open in a way he hadn't known was possible. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa. I've been waiting to meet you." The baby made a soft sound, something between a coo and a sigh, and Jonas was lost. Completely, irrevocably lost to love for this tiny person. "What should we name her?" Evelyn asked. They'd discussed names for months without settling on anything definite. But looking at his daughter now, Jonas knew exactly what her name should be. Grace, he said. We should call her Grace because she's a gift we didn't earn and don't deserve, but are grateful for anyway. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Grace Pike. It's perfect. Charlotte and Martha returned to check on them, cooing over the baby and fussing over Evelyn. Soon Robert arrived with little Robert Jr., who stared at baby Grace with fascination. She's very small, the 3-year-old observed. Smaller than my dollies. She'll get bigger, Jonas assured him. Hopefully not as big as me, but bigger than she is now. As evening deepened into night and the visitors eventually departed, Jonas sat in the rocking chair beside the bed, holding Grace while Evelyn slept. He studied every detail of his daughter's face, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes, the impossible softness of her skin, the way she seemed to trust him completely, despite his enormous hands and intimidating size. I promise you, he whispered to the sleeping baby, I'll always be gentle with you. I'll teach you to be strong and kind. I'll read you poetry and show you the northern lights. I'll make sure you never feel too much of anything, too big, too small, too different. You're perfect exactly as you are, and I'll spend my whole life making sure you know that. Grace sighed in her sleep, her tiny hand gripping his finger with surprising strength. And Jonas Pike, the man who'd been too tall for door frames and too different to fit in, who'd traveled hundreds of miles on the hope of finding someone who might love him, sat in his home with his wife sleeping safely and his daughter in his arms, and felt complete for the first time in his life. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys in the way that life always does. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who adored her father and thought nothing of his size, because to her Jonas had always been perfect. A son followed 2 years later, William, who had Evelyn's dark hair and Jonas's build, already showing signs he'd be tall like his father. The farm prospered under their joint management. Jonas's carpentry business grew until he was training apprentices and taking on projects across the territory. The commendation ceremony finally happened when Grace was 6 months old. Jonas stood uncomfortably in his finest clothes, while the territorial governor praised his heroism and presented him with an official medal of valor. Evelyn stood beside him, Grace in her arms, and when the crowd applauded, Jonas reached for his wife's hand and held tight, grounding himself in what really mattered. Sarah Brennan, the little girl from the past, grew up considering Jonas a second father. She visited often, playing with Grace and eventually baby William, bringing news of her family and the world beyond Pine Hollow. When she was old enough to understand the full story of her rescue, she would sit on Jonas's porch and make him tell it over and over, always marveling that someone cared enough to risk everything for a stranger's child. "Why did you do it?" she asked once when she was 12 and Jonas was 38, his hair just beginning to show streaks of silver. "You could have died. You had a wife and baby coming. Why risk it all for someone you didn't know?" Jonas, with Grace and William playing in the yard and Evelyn humming in the kitchen, thought carefully about his answer. Because feeling like you don't belong, like you're too different to matter, that's its own kind of death, he said finally. I spent most of my life feeling like I was too much, too big, too awkward, like the world wasn't built for someone like me. But your rescue showed me something important. Maybe I was built the way I am for a reason. Maybe being different isn't a curse if you use it right. He smiled at the young woman Sarah was becoming. You asked me why I risked it all. But Sarah, you are exactly why. Because every life matters. Because children deserve to grow up. Because I could help. So I had to help, that's all. Sarah hugged him fiercely, this giant of a man who'd saved her life and never asked for anything in return. On an evening in late summer, 15 years after Jonas had first stepped off that train in Pine Hollow, he and Evelyn sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. Grace and William were staying overnight with Charlotte and Robert, giving their parents a rare evening alone. The farm stretched before them, prosperous and well-maintained, the barn straight and true. Every door frame in the house now tall enough to accommodate Jonas's height, with room to spare. "Do you ever regret it?" Jonas asked, suddenly answering Charlotte's advertisement, taking a chance on a mail-order husband you'd never met. Evelyn looked at her husband of 15 years, at the grey threading through his hair and the laugh lines around his eyes, at the hands that had held her through joy and sorrow. that had built their home and saved lives and cradled their children with infinite gentleness. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You were too tall for the doorframe, Jonas Pike. But you were exactly right for my heart. You still are." He pulled her close, and they sat together as stars began appearing overhead, one by one, filling the vast Wyoming sky with light. Two people who'd been lonely and lost had found each other against all odds, had built a life together that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. And if travelers passing through Pine Hollow in later years asked about the tall man and his small wife who walked hand in hand through golden fields, who'd raised good children and built a thriving farm, who'd saved lives and earned the respect of an entire territory, the townspeople would smile and tell the story of Jonas Pike, who came on a train too tall to fit through door frames, but perfect for the woman who gave him her heart. The story of Evelyn Hart Pike, who was brave enough to risk loving again and wise enough to see the man beneath the size. The story of two people who proved that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances, from opening doors and widening frames, for making room in your heart for someone who doesn't quite fit, but who might be exactly what you need. And as the sun set over Wyoming territory, as it had set every evening for millions of years, and would set for millions more, Jonas and Evelyn Pike held each other close and counted themselves blessed beyond measure because they'd found something rare and precious in this world, a love that fit perfectly even when nothing else did. A